Dump
Testing.
smells like fish.
It's nothing
All right.
quite like a good dump.
All right, so all is right in the world. Jarl's good, other guys good. Awesome. So yeah, so this is a long form conversational podcast where I'm just kind of hanging out with some friends and we're going to shoot the shit. Tonight's big topic is basically D&D gaming, nerd culture, nerddom, and of course, a little bit of a spotlight of our guests, Erasmus and Jarl. So we'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Jarl. Want to let people know who you are?
Absolutely. I'm actually super stoked to be here. But primarily, this is the first real production that Jeremy and I have been in, Jeremy's Erasmus Expeditions. We've known each other in the community since 2015, commented on each other's posts, but for some reason never made the time to actually do something about it. So, oh, great. I'm getting flamed already. But those of you who know me, I do tabletop RPGs and a variety of games on my Twitch channel under the same name. So definitely check it out. After the podcast today, we're going to be unveiling Wild West Dynasty. It's early access release today. And I'm hoping to learn enough about the game so that tomorrow I can do chat versus streamer and cry because for some reason I enjoy that. But super awesome to be here. I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully Jeremy will like me enough after this that he'll actually invite me to some games. Okay.
All right. And next up would be Erasmus Expeditions. Both of these people have actually been on the podcast before. So it's great to have the both of you together. We're actually Erasmus and I were talking about that before you got into the call, Jarl. So that's exciting. But Erasmus, want to let everyone all kinds of things. Do you want to let everyone know who you are, what you're up to?
Oh, I suppose so. Yeah. Everybody, my name is Jeremy or Erasmus. It doesn't matter what you call me. I'll probably answer. But yeah, I have a YouTube channel called the Erasmas Expeditions. Mostly do live play sessions of games, variety of different systems and settings. And I also usually host a video podcast called The Help Action, where I have a single guest come on and we kind of talk about a certain topic, get to know them a little bit better and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm a huge TTRPG nerd, as well as movies and video games, board games, you name it. But yeah, I'm really excited to have the chance to kind of sit down and talk again with Nate, but also this time with James. I'm super excited, man. Yeah, like you said, we've run the same circles for a long time, and yeah, this will be the first time other than the one community hangout that we did on Dimension 119 for us to kind of really interact. So I'm super stoked.
Awesome. Yeah, this is like the superstars of our tabletop group and streaming kind of group here. So this is an awesome experience. What I find, so we originally wanted to do this a few weeks ago, and Dimension was supposed to be here as well. He got caught up with some other obligations, unfortunately. But we were going to do this a few weeks ago when there was a big old kerfuffle about the open game license with Wizards of the Coast. Now, I'm terrible at keeping up with it. It sounds like it's all figured out now, but do you want to talk about that and kind of give some insight? What happened? How did it fix? How did it get fixed? If it even is fixed?
Wow. That's a dumpster fire to start with.
It sounded like
it. Like as far as insight goes, I don't have any. Like I don't have any kind of connection whatsoever to the inside. Just what I've read and kind of discussed with people.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the whole thing was just a giant fiasco. It was a massive PR nightmare that I think maybe WotC learned their lesson on. I'm hoping. But we'll see. Time will tell, because they are a massive corporation and they have a healthy bottom line. Thick with 3 C's.
Right. Yeah. Extra thick.
Like a milkshake.
Actually, I have an update, and I'll go ahead and post it in chat. But WotC is
Mhm.
now offering interviews to really big YouTubers that are D&D based. So I posted a link in chat. Definitely recommend you look at that video because she offers an unbiased opinion on it, and they're still question dodging, and they're still avoiding a lot of what's going on.
That's
But
unfortunate.
from the different interviews that I've done, this stems back quite a few years. And I, as a game designer, as somebody who went to school for it, hearing wizards talk, I can read in between the lines. A lot of people are, well, what do you mean afraid of content? What do you mean? I don't know of any abusive content that's been created for the game, right? That has not been a thing. What do you guys talk about? But the principle of it is that this whole OGL conversation started in Wizards before a lot of the staff was there. It is not a Hasbro decision. It is a Wizards decision. The core intent of it is, do we do monetization, and if so, how? But the other thing, like the gross royalties, that was just but the other thing about it was that in 2011 we had Penny Arcade go live with their first Acquisitions Incorporated game, which spurred a movement that created Matt Mercer's games, like created that space where it was there. And I know it sounds ludicrous to say that nobody's actually ever done a video stream of a D&D game, but really until Acquisitions Incorporated did it, it wasn't something that Dungeons and Dragons was considering. It was something they were pushing for. They worked with Acquisitions Incorporated. They wanted that live tabletop, but they missed the mark once again, because in 2008, 4th edition released, and in the back of the OG 4th edition book, they were like, we're going to have our own VTT, and it's going to have a 3D game board with our minis in it. And then that plan fell through, and they didn't have money to start it over again. 4th edition obviously didn't sell well, but 4th edition did bring new people to the table. That was step one. By bringing the new people to the table, a lot of people will say 4th edition didn't really have an impact on 5, but 5e has advantage and disadvantage.
Oh, yeah.
Inspiration points. I mean, there was a huge effect to it. Definitely welcomed a lot of new people. But as our years have gone on, and I'm not going to get political about it, but to give you a hint, it started in 2016. I think that was where it was made more public in the news that there is a division of culture where we have a very inclusive, progressive hobby, and then we have a very exclusive, like almost prejudice generation. Right. Yeah. And I understand why Wizards was concerned when they started this years ago. They were concerned that with this influx of new people, especially with Stranger Things pulling new people in, especially with Dungeons and Dragons, like all these movie stars coming out and playing Dungeons and Dragons, and some of them you would never expect. Vin Diesel, Joe Manganiello, and all these other people joining into the hobby, and made it okay for jocks and stuff to enjoy the hobby. But we also saw another side of that. People coming back from the Iraqi war played D&D while they were over there, and it started to bring more and more people into the fold. No longer was D&D the tale of the bullied kid, the bullied nerd who couldn't express themselves, and that was their outlet. But like all of a sudden, we started getting into things where new groups of people were coming in, and Wizards had a genuine fear that some of the themes of their homebrew games would be borderline content that they don't support. They've always been a fan of the LGBTQ crowd. They've always included them. And then when 5th edition was like, hey, you could identify as whatever you want. Here's an example of a species that's asexual, and started bringing, there was a kerfuffle in the community that people didn't expect. So it was like cracks in the pavement.
Yeah.
But
and I think too, like one of the parallels that kind of was happening at the same time that a lot of this was going on, and this kind of attention was starting to gather, is there's been a shift in the cultural zeitgeist where fantasy and science fiction and things of that have become a lot more acceptable to just enjoy. The franchise that shall not be named, for example, the Lord of the Rings, another kick of Star Wars coming up, all of those kinds of things kind of rekindled that flame for a lot of people. And instead of it having to be a thing where you were privately a fan of something, it became a lot more acceptable to be openly a fan of things. And I think that helped a huge amount, because
tremendously, yeah.
The way society looks at these things has changed.
Yeah,
I think that's a good point too, and I think one of the things that we're dealing with too is it's kind of our fault. Let's be honest, us D&D nerds, there are communities where we are open and welcoming, but our hobby is full of a lot of gatekeepers.
Yes, unfortunately.
And that's very unfortunate, because we've created our own caste structure in gaming, where it's, popularity contests. It's, oh, well, I prefer high fantasy and it's the ultimate way to play D&D, or I prefer low magic. That's the only way to play D&D. And there's these groups that say this is the only way you can enjoy it. And they're missing the point. It's not the only way you can enjoy it.
Exactly.
And then, of course, with the digital gaming in 2020 hit, people had PDFs and they did digital gaming more and more and more. There were more accessible outlets for it. And I'm sure we're all sick and tired of buying, the physical books and then turning around and buying those same books on D&D Beyond, and then buying the same books on Roll20, and then buying the same books on Fantasy Grounds. And I totally get it. It has made the hobby, in a way, a little more inaccessible. And in a time where nobody was working, there was definitely a spike of, well, I bought the PDF, so I'm just going to give you copies of the PDF. And that has, here they are looking at this big, huge popularity boon of D&D, and they're looking at their profits going, it's not
reflecting. Yeah. Yeah. The math, mathing.
It also, it doesn't help that, like, what they have as a business model isn't like returnable revenue. It's not, it's once you've bought the books, you don't have to buy anything else if you don't want to. It's not like a recurring payment that you have to make yet. But I think that's when they're comparing that to like the monthly subscriptions that a lot of video game services or microtransactions that are going on in the video game service, and the kind of money that's bringing in, they're looking at it thinking that they're missing out on those kinds of things, but they're comparing apples and oranges. They don't play the same way.
They don't. And I will say that in the interviews that I've seen where Wizards of the Coast addressed the problem, first off, I think the biggest reason why this tumbled out of control so much, and I'm not defending WotC and their decision to change the OGL or the SRD and stuff like that, but where the blowout came from is that no one from Wizards, Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins, went silent. Everybody went silent. In fact, while this was going on, Jeremy Crawford's last post about what's going on at Wizards was December 18th, 2022. Everybody went quiet. What we didn't know is that they are understaffed, and they were immediately trying to frantically plug holes in the ship while more holes were being made. But when they say that they want to do microtransactions with one D&D, what they want is that when you buy a monster manual, you get the minis for it for the VTT. Right? When you buy a player's handbook, you get some basic minis for the heroes. The microtransactions they want to do is, if you want your unique character, they're going to have a character studio where you can gear it up and then buy that miniature. If you want an orc boss to lead your orcs, you can gear that up. If you want special scenery, you can buy it. It's all optional. None of it's required to play the game. And from the start of it, the VTT they're working on will come with a lot more resources than you will need. But like those little cardboard placards that we used to buy when 4th edition was really huge, they're going to have map packs like, the swamp pack. But if you buy a campaign module, it'll come with all of the relevant terrain and stuff in it, so that it gives you the option to omit from buying it. Right. Yeah. If they would have just said that from the get-go, I think people would have been cool about it. They didn't, though.
Exactly. Instead, they decided to set the blimp on fire and just not say anything to anybody about it.
Right? Yeah, and they were asked, well, why didn't you come forward with this sooner? And apparently it was a decision made by Wizards of the Coast, and they were working on their drafts, and something happened in the company where they accidentally sent the draft to only a handful of companies to sign, and they made it sound like a contract. That was not supposed to happen. And if Wizards of the Coast just came out at the beginning and said that was a mistake, people would have been fine with it. But instead, they were like, how did this occur? What do we do? It's a whole dumpster fire now. And Wizards of the Coast is not very good at handling this kind of stuff. They just went through it in the 30th anniversary release of Magic the Gathering. And oh my God, their response was shallow. It was so shallow.
And I feel bad because, you know, I know a couple of people.
Yes, Raven. I think accidentally is a very, very good word for it, because literally only 6 companies got the signature that they can count on. And those companies provided no proof as to what they were forced to sign. They just said, we were forced to sign something. And it wasn't until an employee leaked the document. Again, that is an accident, that things kind of went out of control. This was nowhere near their final, but at the same time, you know how passionate your fan base is. You can't make mistakes like this. It's still your fault. It's still 100% is your fault. And yeah, Scott Dog, I kind of agree with Scott Dog. The way Wizards handled this was really dumb, but they aren't like other companies that are like, well, you have smartphones, right? Like that was Blizzard's response when Diablo Immortal was announced to be a mobile game. And then the one guy went, is this an April Fool's joke? There is a PC game coming, right? The guy's response is, well, you all have smartphones, don't you? It wasn't an aggressive response, but
I missed that one.
Yeah. Oh my God. It was so funny. Right at BlizzCon in front of live TV, they said, well, y'all have smartphones, don't you? And start screaming at the audience. I was like, what? But in a way, I would have rather had something than no response. You know, I feel like Wizards had us on red. Like we're a guy interested in dating them, and they put us on red, and we're like, hello, I know you saw this.
And just spamming them with messages. Hey.
But it's like, then the whole thing about no homebrewing and stuff. They never wanted to cancel homebrewing, but that message of homebrewing came in because they wanted to review everything. But then if you watch these interviews, Wizards admits that they can't even review the stuff that's being published now. So what is their hope with this? Like that whole thing. I mean, it was an overshoot. It just scared everybody.
So is it fixed now?
No. The fact of the matter is they still have to microtransaction. They still do. Now the SRD and the OGL, from now on, the SRD is part of the Creative Commons, and 1 D&D isn't a new version like everybody's claiming. Oh, well, it's 6. No, it's a version that will never have a version. So 5.A, 5.B, 5.C, 5.D, they will always update the SRD with the new materials to make it backwards compatible for 5th and 4th. But it will immediately go to Creative Commons. And for people who don't know what that means, Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization that is international, that once it's on Creative Commons, they can't legally come after you for crap. It's something that should have been done when the OGL was very first announced, because it would have protected creators. If creators had the SRD protected by Creative Commons, they would have been like, well, you know, they're changing the OGL. Let's see what they do, but they can't infringe on the rights of the SRD.
Yeah, I was not like, I heard a little bit about the whole situation. I wasn't on like scouring Twitter or anything like that. And I didn't know all the history before that as well. So I kind of, in a certain sense, I didn't feel like I had a horse in the race to talk about it, because I didn't really know the intricacies and everything that was going on. But that's really interesting.
And like,
it seemed like
there's a lot of people that got really bent out of shape over it. You know, and to a degree, some of it I understand. Like if your business model is releasing content that relies on the OGL, then obviously that's bad for you. That's a really bad situation. And I guess I'm fortunate enough that that's not the case for me. But I was just like, I'm just going to keep playing the game the way that I want to play it. Like that's that's the way I've always done it, and that's the way I'm going to keep doing it.
That's what I would. That was my first thought, is like, if I'm just sitting at home wasn't really what they were referencing. It was like, streaming or making content about it. But my whole thought process on that was the more people making content about it I would think drive more revenue in a sense, because that would be more people being introduced to
1,000%.
the game and bringing more people in to buy books and minis and all kinds of stuff. So that's why the whole thing just didn't really make sense to me. And I think maybe that's why for someone like me who doesn't know or keep up with all the little details, it just kind of looked like a big old cash grab, and we're gonna smush our finger down on anyone trying to kind of come up in media production or something like that.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem is that I don't think they understand streaming.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that started it with Penny Arcade. But I don't think they understand streaming, because they look at streaming, they look at the views, and they're like, wow, that's really good. You know, look at all these views, look at all this money. We can get into this and we can protect the content creators. But at the same time, the decisions they were making was very good for high-end creators like Critical Role or Penny Arcade. You know, it was very formal, very legal, right?
Right.
But when they look at the numbers, of course, those two campaigns pop up real big at the top. But to give you an idea of some of the content they were afraid of, there was JP is a streamer. He used to play with DJ Wheat, who's a higher up in Twitch. And they had a channel called Roleplay, which was shut down because Adam Coble, one of the DMs, really kind of he ignored the red flag rule and sexually assaulted one of the female characters. And it just so happens that streamer
pretty uncomfortable
suffered that, right? It was very uncomfortable.
Okay.
That's why Wizards was like, maybe we should start getting involved in monitoring some of this content.
Interesting.
But at the same time, that wasn't Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, and that's exactly where my mind would go to is they shouldn't be held responsible for the actions that someone else did in their own game, you know.
But in the nature of streaming, they are, right?
Really?
If somebody comes in here and drops the N-word in your chat, and even if you ban them immediately, you can get banned on Twitch if Twitch is feeling like it, because you didn't set up the profanity filters. It's your fault. It's, you know, if like, for example, and this isn't criticizing you at all, but I notice you have no moderators in your chat. That's your fault. If somebody comes in here and verbally abuses us, that's kind of like your fault. But at the same time, they're getting panicked because they're turning on the TV and they're seeing what our world is like today. The blatant erasing of people's cultures, and they're like, we can't have this. And then what spurred their entire, like, we have to get this out soon, is the reaction to Rings of Power. I am ashamed in some of the groups that I am in when I hear them say this was just a piece that pandered to critical race theory and feminism and blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm sorry, but I grew up playing Lord of the Rings with a friend of mine when we were younger. We'd go out in the backyard and play Lord of the Rings, and he was black. It's not my place to tell him he doesn't have a place in Lord of the Rings. It's not my place to tell him that he can't make a dark-skinned elf. He can't embrace his own culture and bring it into the fantasy setting. Like, that's not... But seeing the fan base and how they reacted to the Rings of Power, it's like, bro, we are a toxic fan base.
So Rings of Power, that was a Lord of the Rings thing on on like Hulu or something. On Amazon. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. I didn't even know there was a big old situation with that one too.
Oh yeah. And the moment they showed an African American playing an elf was the moment that even fandom's I Claim Home went fucking ape shit.
Really?
Galadriel was a warrior princess? No. I'm like, listen, guys, I hate to tell you this. I know that the fantasy setting in which shall be named, you know, that's having its problems right now, especially with the release of their new game. And everybody's like, we need to cancel the world. We need to cancel everybody who likes the world. We need to cancel. And I'm like, you guys do realize that J.R.R. Tolkien was an over-the-top fanatical Catholic who took C.S. Lewis, who worked in the same school as him, and converted him to Christianity. Narnia was written with a Christian undertone because J.R.R. Tolkien encouraged C.S. Lewis to do that. And we're forgetting that this has happened before. Yet J.R.R. Tolkien's dead now. Okay. The whitewashed male dominant world he created in the past is gone. In the Lord of the Rings movies, Arwen was the elf that ran out to help Aragorn with Frodo when Frodo got stung by the blade and called upon the river. But in the books, Arwen did not do that. In the books, it was mostly men. The one point in the book where it's like, oh my God, it's not, was when no man can kill me. And then the helmet comes off and I am no man. That was great, but that's the only woman of power.
It's a wonderful rendition.
Right? But yeah, exactly. I just basically just put me
they should have cast you.
Lord of the Rings, right? But it's just like, no, I think, to be honest, I do think the Rings of Power missed the mark. But I think the Rings of Power brought a lot new fans to the Lord of the Rings table, and we shouldn't shame them for that. There were some positives to it.
Agreed.
I didn't like how accelerated the storyline felt. I didn't like how they portrayed Galadriel. I don't mind that she was this elven hunter. I don't mind that she was a warrior. But between you and me, she was kind of a bitch. Like, she's so horrible in that show. But at the same time, it's like, there's still some positives that came out of it that we can embrace. And they even talked about, you know what, the first season, we missed the mark. We're going to listen to you and we're going to create the second season. And but that doesn't matter in today's culture. The cancel. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's not the same.
I had, so when the first the newest trilogy of Star Wars came out, I saw a bunch of people were mad about what was Finn? Was that the Black Stormtrooper? Yeah, I heard, I know there's a bunch of people kind of, you know, and I was in like high school. No, I might have been in high school. Yeah. Anyway, 2013, somewhere around there.
You're asking us, like we know?
Yeah. No, you weren't in high school. Definitely middle school. Look at that baby face.
But yeah, I was around the high school age, and I remember people getting real mad about it. And like, you know, Star Wars was the one fandom that I felt like I've always kind of been in it. And I was thinking, I was like, maybe I'm wrong, but after the clones were kind of, all right, we can't be using them anymore because they can't necessarily, we can't use clones anymore. They just started pulling from the local population, and like just about everyone was able to become some part of the Empire and don the suits. You got all kinds of aliens doing that, and all kinds of people. So that was one thing where that was probably the first time where I noticed that a little change like that was unexpected, caused like a, not mayhem, but like caused an outburst from fans.
Oh yeah. And the death threats to the actress that played Rose.
Yeah, like, isn't that crazy?
Why?
For no reason.
Just say
Listen, I didn't like the new Star Wars movies. I'm with Mark Hamill. They did Luke dirty, right? Like, I'm sorry, but they did Luke hella dirty. I'm not saying he should have had a main role, but they should have given him something more to do.
But if you're
everything
bring
he
back
did,
Luke, that's
right.
Yeah,
it just seems kind of like off the mark. But the Star Wars movies, you could definitely tell that they just kind of invented stuff as they went, like hyperspacing yourself through an enemy vessel. Well, most hyperdrives wouldn't let you hyperdrive if something was in the way. That's how the video games worked. It's how the lore has worked. And now all of a sudden you have a hyperdrive that you could just point at an enemy vessel. And they did that on purpose, because if you could have done that from the get-go, oh, come on, Rebellion. Take your Mon Calamari battle cruiser, set hyperdrive, don't have anybody on it except for an astromech droid, and drive it into the Death Star. Problem solved.
What about so kind of sticking on that one here, because I haven't really gotten anyone's opinion on this. What do you guys feel about Leia using the Force to like pull herself back into the ship. Do you remember when she got blasted out of the ship? And I don't know if there's some level of lore, because I didn't read any of the books or any of that. Whether it was
Well, they tossed all
canon,
that out the window.
well, I guess so. I don't know.
Yeah, they said that the expanded universe no longer mattered. It wasn't. They weren't going to that anymore.
I'm sorry, but thank God
And-
the Yuuzhan Vong were terrible.
Yeah,
and there are so many other characters in the expanded universe. It's like, really, this is a thing? Like,
that's what we're doing there.
But I love the fact that Leia turned out to be a Force user. But I would have liked to have seen some kind of thing established before. Just now I can fly.
We did see something established in the old movies. Luke is like, haha, Obi-Wan, Yoda, F you guys, I'm going to go save Han Solo, right? And then Obi-Wan's like, well, that's it. We're done. We've lost. And then Luke says, no, there is another. Meaning Leia. And then in the third movie, Return of the Jedi, there's a point where Leia comes out to talk to Luke, and Luke's like, I got to go talk to Vader. And she goes, I know. She just knew. And then there's also a part where the Death Star blows up, and Han Solo's like, I'm sure he wasn't aboard that thing. And she's like, I know. She just knew.
Sure.
Definitely she's Force sensitive, right?
Very, very subtle, but it's been in there.
It's been in there for a while.
Gotcha.
Even in the EU, the extended universe, she was still somewhat of a Force user.
Gotcha.
But my problem is never before in Star Wars has anyone been spaced and freaking Mary Poppins their way back into the ship. That was just like, if anything, when she was doing the cutscene of Ben and her looking at each other, she should have prepared herself. It would have been cool if the ship got blown apart and then she used the Force to channel the explosion and block the hole and then pass out. Cool. Acceptable. But flying into space and then just being like, like, please, come on. Like, I'm not saying Star Wars has to be realistic, but there's got to be something to that. There's got to be something more to that. I was sitting here going, I saw YouTube, they did a thing where like she was knocked unconscious when she got sucked out into space, and somebody clipped the video to show Luke on his planet. And he looks up in the sky and he closes his eyes and holds his hand out, and then she gets pushed into the ship. So it was Luke that sensed the danger and pushed her into the ship. And then in the very next scene of the YouTube edit, he's like, fine, training starts at dawn. And that was his deciding factor, that he needed to train her. But also I was just like, really? She didn't have to go into space. She could have been trapped under a bulkhead. She could have had to fend off fire. She could have saved some people. It just seemed so weird.
Yeah, I definitely got that.
It didn't fit Star Wars very much.
Right.
In my opinion.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I had a lot of issues with the new trilogy, but you know, like a lot of the things that we're talking about, ultimately at the end of the day, if there's more content out there, then that just means that we have a better chance of getting good content. As long as that cultural zeitgeist is still fed, then there will be content creators who are bringing new and interesting ideas to these genres or these IPs. And as long as that's happening, I'll suffer the bad shit as long as there's still gold that can be mined out of it.
That's exactly what I said when it first started coming out, when everyone's like, oh, well, you know, Disney's ruining Star Wars. And I'm like, listen, I'm not super excited about these new movies coming out. But then I loved Rogue One. I thought that was kick ass. I loved what's it, Mandalorian, right? So it's like,
Andor.
You know,
Brilliant.
Andor, yeah.
I mean, it was, I would rather have Star Wars content than not have anything and just reminisce on the good old days where, you know, you could watch the 6 movies you have.
Well, and again, you and I talked about this kind of, you know, before we went live, you know, when you watch something for the first time, what you're experiencing and going through at that particular time in your life changes the way that it impacts you. So like, even if you watch the original trilogy now, especially with your cynical ass, for all those fans out there that get butthurt over this stuff, then you probably wouldn't like it either.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. But at the time, with whatever,
exactly,
like we mentioned, whatever your experiences at the time, I mean, it comes off as like, this is the perfect way to explain me and the human story, and what my human story is through stories, and that is just what humans do. We connect with stories on like such a weird, deep level.
It's intrinsic, truly.
Yeah.
I mean, and also, you guys cannot sit here and tell me that Disney, Star Wars isn't in the right hands with Disney, because does anyone remember the Star Wars holiday special? Like, okay, like, there's been a lot of Star Wars stuff released by LucasArts that I'm just like in the comic books of the extended universe, there's one comic book that is canon where they fly back in time and crash land on a planet, and everybody aboard the Millennium Falcon dies. Do you know how that comic ends? The Millennium Falcon's buried underground, and then all of a sudden there's a light shaft that hits it, and Indiana Jones comes down and finds the Millennium Falcon. And that's a canon comic for the extended universe. I'm like, no, that's stupid. They go into the future and then meet us. Like, that's so dumb.
Out of everywhere in the whole universe, you land here, and this is what you get. Oh man, that's great. So yeah, what's it? One thing that I also wanted to touch upon is Erasmus and I talked about this in our first podcast about kind of how we started D&D, and y'all, we mentioned this as well. I was curious, do you remember, because we mentioned how D&D has brought in a lot of new people into the hobby. Do you guys remember like that first player you had in a game where they came off as like, this is stupid, I'm not gonna play this game, but you convince them to come to session 1, session 0, whatever it is, and then at some point in that first campaign you saw the click in their eyes and you're like, this is the sickest thing I've ever experienced?
Do you want me to be honest when that happened for me?
Absolutely.
I was working at a
were you the
Wizards,
jock?
No, I was working at a Wizards of the Coast retail store, and I was hired on at a young age to run D&D games. That was my job. I didn't have any official title. And this edition 3.5 came out, and D&D 3 failed to rope in new players. It was mostly the grognards coming in. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, grognard is a friendly term we use for people who played D&D 2.0 and D&D 1, who's like, they're the only real editions, get off my lawn, like.
Have you heard the explanation of where that term comes from?
No,
I have not. I would love to.
Fascinating. So apparently there was a unit in Napoleon's army called Les Grognards, and it's literally French for the grumblers. They were the only soldiers in the entire army who could openly complain in front of their superiors. Because they were older soldiers and they had been through it all, so they were given that kind of level of respect. And so like, it's literally the people who have been doing this a long time who like to bitch.
That's hilarious.
Literally why it fits so well.
That makes sense.
It makes so much sense.
But so here I am in Wizards of the Coast, and they're like, we really need 3.5 to take off. It's just not taking off. So they had beautiful books. They resold the Player's Handbook number 2, right? Which was 3.5, was an expansion of the Player's Handbook, but they included more in it. One of the best things they ever did with 3.5 was in the Monster Manual of 3.5, you could choose to play a monster class. If you played as a lizard folk, you had to be a minimum of level 3. So you're not going to be in a level 1 campaign because their stats, their natural stats, were so much higher than the base species. But it allowed people to explore, I want to play a kobold. Well, now you can. But getting these people who were so used to going down to their comic book store and buying a paper pamphlet at the time for $10 and running a campaign, getting them convinced to play, these more advanced books. It was a hard thing to twist. That, and there were a couple other materials that made it very hard to sell.
You always got props.
Certain writers, to go on the whole, like, we need to monitor our content a little better. Monty Cook, I love the man. I really do. Comes up with some good things. This is a book called The Book of Vile Darkness. And inside is nudity and horrors that would, like this book, if I were to run this now, I'm pretty sure most groups I'd play with would red card me on 3/4 of this material. It wasn't long before that material was like, maybe we shouldn't make stuff like that. But once 3 came out, they had minis. And they're like, we're going to charge for these minis. Then you buy a box of minis and you pull out your elf hero miniature, and one of the eyeballs is the size of a chameleon. Like, they were not very well painted way back then. It was really horrible. And that in the minis, when you got them, it'd be like a wizard holding a staff, but then the staff was curved because it got bent in the box. Like, there was a lot of like execution of these plastic miniatures that people are like, why did you step away from the pewter minis? Like, what's the deal with that? And then terrible molding. Exactly. And they also sold them in boxes to where you couldn't choose what you bought. It was like a trading card game. They were monetizing D&D even back in 3.0. It's like, stupid. So it was very hard to sell D&D. So that was my job at Wizards of the Coast, was to stand in their back game room and run games. And I can tell you that 3.5 is when I first started to notice the huge, and I mean huge, the huge movement towards Dungeons and Dragons. The D&D movie had failed in 2000, so it wasn't because of that. They were talking about another D&D movie, and people were like, whatever. But at the same time, they brought back a setting that they knew would sell really well. That was Greyhawk. There was a lot of materials for Greyhawk. And then they brought out the Dragonlance books, and then they brought out Forgotten Realms, and everything was great. And they're like, you know what? Forgotten Realms feels good. So when 4th edition came out, it was like Forgotten Realms. And then when 5th edition came out, Forgotten Realms, that was the setting. And I think a lot of us are just getting burned out on Forgotten Realms. But at the same time, when 4th edition came out, that was another huge boost of people, because the people who played World of Warcraft, and that was the model RPG that they were going to base everything on.
Sure.
4th edition helped build that bridge. For people who liked wargaming, 4th edition was not bad. And I dare say it was probably the most balanced combat you will find out of any of the D&Ds.
I actually liked 4th edition a fair bit. I think overall I like 5th edition more, but I had no issue with 4th edition. That's where I was running games in 4th edition, like really starting to run games, and I had no issues with it. It was fun. It was easy, and it's like everything flowed really nicely, as far as I could tell, at least. But
it's the only edition of the game aside from like Chainmail that I have never played before, but I have taken a lot of things from it. I use minions in 5e because it's a brilliant concept. And it's skill challenges are another thing that I use in my 5e games. I just don't know much about it because we were happy playing 3rd edition whenever it came out. We were like, there's no reason to reinvest. Like, we're good playing this. And it wasn't until 5th edition came out that I was like, okay, this is different enough that I'm interested in kind of checking it out. And I'm ready for a new blood, fresh blood.
Yeah, refresh. Yeah.
To answer Ravenroll's question, yes, the core rulebook was hinting towards Nintervale, but when you look at the deities of 4th edition, that's Forgotten Realms. And then the Forgotten Realms campaign guide released in August of 2008 and sold really well. And then after that, it was just Forgotten Realms, Forgotten Realms, Forgotten Realms, Forgotten Realms, more Forgotten Realms. Wizards has a habit of selling something and then beating it to death.
I'm really lucky because I've never run any of the canon D&D settings. I've always made my own. Part of that was because when I first started playing, I didn't have any books, so I had to make everything up if I wanted to be able to play. But I prefer that anyways, because I have a lot more input of the tone and like, you know, what's important, and that's just kind of my nature anyways. It's just, you know, as a storyteller and a world builder, I prefer having my fingers on, you know, the design of the world. So there's still a ton about the Forgotten Realms that I don't know about, even though I've been playing this game for, you know, almost 30 years.
For sure. We got a really good question from the Adventuring. It says, what are the games you guys like most apart from D&D? I think that's a really good question. Erasmus, do you want to start this one off?
Yeah, hell yeah. I'm a little biased. I have a game system of my own that I designed, and I have for sale on the Drive-Thru RPG that I like quite a bit. It's a very rules light, one-page RPG, very narrative driven. So you can pick up and play in like 10 minutes, and it's very much designed around storytelling and the mechanics kind of just becoming a support structure for whatever story it is you're telling. So I really enjoy that one. There's a couple of different versions out now. I think there's 4 that I have. But as far as published, Mecha Hack by Absolute Tabletop is one of my favorites. It's so easy to tinker with. I've used it to run Mad Max games. I've used it to run Halo games. It's a really fun, fast system. As far as something that's a little more crunchy, Cortex Prime is a game that I picked up and gave a try probably about a year or so ago, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm definitely planning on running more of that in the future, because it's just a really interesting. I even hesitate to call it a system. It's more of like a toolbox. You get to choose different pieces and what pieces you want to use in order to play the kind of game that you want to play. You know, like I ran a Firefly campaign with it, and
nice.
Like instead of using skills, we used things like emotions, relationships, and that's what generated a lot of your ability to resolve conflict. Was who was involved in a scene and what you had at stake, and it's just a much different experience. So yeah, I highly recommend.
Neat.
Yeah,
Jarl.
Yeah, I feel the same. My introduction into my twisted mind that is Dungeons and Dragons is that my mom and dad played Dungeons and Dragons. They were big fans since it came out, which you have to understand that at the time my dad was like 20 when it came out. So like, but it was before when I got introduced into tabletop RPGs, I was 10 years old. So we're talking 1996, back in the day. But the problem with it is that Lord of the Rings at the time kind of fell off the map. The only Lord of the Rings materials we had were a really crappy cartoon where like the eyeballs made the hobbits look like bugs and stuff like that. And the problem that I have with that is everything was just so like, pardon me, excuse me, pardon me. And I had grew up my entire life being, my friends were obsessed with Power Rangers. They were obsessed with X-Men. They were obsessed with cowboys and Indians. I was obsessed with the medieval ages, but I studied historical medieval ages. So then when I picked up D&D 3rd edition in 2000, I was bored. D&D's settings aren't real enough for me. They're not dark enough. I don't like that you could just wave your hand and cast a spell and poof, your leg is back. Like that didn't happen in 2nd edition. But one of my first fantasy books my mom bought me when I was 10 was a book called Game of Thrones. Clearly my mom did not vet that book before she bought it for me, but it perverted my idea on political intrigue and the level of violence because it embraced medieval history. And it embraced that mentality, and it was a very functioning world, whereas Forgotten Realms just isn't. Sorry. Greyhawk is. You can actually, I have the Greyhawk source book where it shows all the kingdoms and all the kings and queens and royalty, dukes and ladies. They really built into that, but the one thing that I thought D&D excelled at especially 3.5, is I was also an avid war gamer. And I love it when a game, like I thought 4th edition was very good in that respect, because it allowed us war gamers to enjoy D&D again. 3.5, it kind of started to fall off the map. And I'm not going to blame Theater of the Mind games. Theater of the Mind is a fantastic way to run your game. But for somebody like me who enjoyed the strategy of a group of people standing around a game board, scratching their heads and working as a team as players, but role playing as their characters, I missed that. And Theater of the Mind just doesn't cut it.
It's not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah. And I mean, you can get away with it. Don't get me wrong. There are DMs that make Theater of the Mind work, and it is brilliant, right? But not me. I get really annoyed with the questions of when I'm like, there's a goblin 30 feet away from you, and I paint the scene, and then we start playing, and they're like, how far is the goblin from me? And I was good. Well, you moved 15 feet, and it started 30 feet, and it moved 15 feet. So you're now in melee range. Okay, I was just making sure because I can't see it. So then here I am doing Theater of the Mind with some people who weren't like the best at D&D, and I ended up drawing minis anyway. I was like, what the heck? So 3.5 was a bit crunchy for a lot of people, a lot of math involved, statuses like +2 to this, +1 to this, -5 to this, -10 to this. It was very crunchy, but I think Paizo proved that that's okay. That is okay. Pathfinder is a lot like that. But then when they simplify D&D, I've never really liked 5th edition because of that. A good example is in my party, right? Somebody used intimidation on a character, but the character did not react in a way that they were intimidated. And I totally sympathize with the player who made the intimidation, because it's like, I agree with you. But unfortunately, because they've slimmed the skills down to like 12 different skills in 5th edition, intimidate covers a broad array of actions. And it's like, oh, I hate that so much. But I have enjoyed how much more role-playing 5th edition brings to the table. That I will cherish. And I do like the fact that they're like, I think 4th and 5th edition was the first time that Wizards was like, hey, you can homebrew your campaign. All these rules, if you don't like one, F it. Make up your own. And it really empowered people. Really empowered people. Whereas 3.5 was like, nope. Because if you change this one piece of the game,
the whole thing falls down. Yeah.
So it was nice to have that. But for me, my favorite systems are the 2D20 series. I love Star Trek Adventures. I love Fallout. Conan's okay, but I just don't really like the setting. I'm a big fan of 5e, or not 5e, but like the D20 clones, like modern D20, not the Saga edition of Star Wars, but the Star Wars that released in 2000 after Revenge of the Sith came out. Really enjoyed that D20 system. It was based off of 3.5, worked so well. Really love those, but I prefer the games that combat is deadly, but narrative is more powerful. And I think that's why I like the 2D20 games more. A good example of that is Fate. Fate can be played on a board, or it can be played. Yeah, it could be played very Theater of the Mind. But the important thing, like Jeremy said, is the relations. But with Fate, it's your relations to the environment that are important, not just your relations socially. So that dumpster is not just a dumpster. It's something you can create to give you cover and stuff like that. And I've even stolen some of those mechanics. I let my D&D players, don't tell anybody on the internet this, but I let them collect group inspiration in a pool. And then they can use that group inspiration to change the scene a little bit. Like, can we just say that this door has a really good lock on it so that we could shut these goblins out? Yeah, for 4 group inspiration, I'll let you do it. You know?
Right.
And now all of a sudden they're hungry for those inspiration points. When I say, hey, that was awesome role playing, here's an inspiration point. I think inspiration points aren't used enough by DMs.
For sure. Yeah.
And
I love
sits there and just
that
shits on it.
negotiation.
It's a really good mechanic.
Yeah, it's a meta
Really
currency. It's you've earned something for doing something that I want to encourage, and now you're asking if you can spend it in whatever way. Like advantage and disadvantage, I don't understand why WotC treats advantage and disadvantage like it's just this amazing thing. It's like it's so easy to get and lose advantage and disadvantage. I don't understand why it's supposed to be this boon. But if you want to cash it in to try to do something that's a little bit outside of the rules, somebody just fell off a cliff, but you've already spent your reaction for the round. If you want to cash in your inspiration point, then I'll let you make a dexterity saving throw to try to catch them. It's a conversation about how we're agreeing where the narrative is going to go next. And whether or not that's going to have to be a die roll, or whether that's going to be some kind of form of currency that we're going to exchange so that it doesn't get out of control. It's, ultimately kind of the same language. It's just about resolving that in a way that is quick and doesn't distract from everything else that's going on, so we can get back to that.
Yeah, and to add on to that, what I love about what you said is that's what I love about group inspirations, allowing them to pool together inspirations that they can dip into. Can I use the 2 inspirations to say that we have, like a chest on board in our house? Yeah, a locked chest with a master lock. Sure, that's 2 inspiration. Why not? But they're not asking me as DM. They're asking their fellow party member. Would you have a problem if I did that? No, are we good? And that out of character, being able to step out of your character, communicate, establishes that this is a game and it's a team-based game. And then being able to separate into that, it's very powerful. But what I do,
that's actually a realization that I came to just not all that long ago as a game master, is that it's better sometimes for me to just step out into the meta conversation and just get the point across so that we can get back to what we're doing. To tell them, you guys might not know this as players, but I'm telling you, your characters understand the situation that they're getting themselves into is incredibly dangerous, that one of you is very likely to die. Do with that what you want, but your characters would understand that. Or, this is going to be a mini game. I know that, these are usually the rules for handling this kind of thing, but I thought that this would be fun to try. So here's going to be the rules that we're going to use just for this encounter. Like having those meta conversations and being comfortable to do that and not have to constantly leave it up as a mystery. Like, oh, you're just going to have to figure out what's going on, because I can't tell you what's going on. And I've loved coming to that realization over the last 3 years or so.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I encourage the inspiration points. I allow every person to have their own that they can give to other people, or they can impose disadvantage on the enemies, which players don't do that enough, man. Use your inspiration to fuck with me. You know what I mean? And then as far as DM inspiration, a lot of times if they roll a 1, right? In 5th edition, a 1 is a critical miss. Some people like to flavor it like you dropped your weapon. A trained soldier would never do that. And if you designed your soldier off of, say, a samurai, you would be killing yourself after that battle or dropping your sword. That would never happen. So instead, if I feel like, you know what, you just missed, but I'm going to take that critical fail and I'm going to give myself an inspiration point. So I, as a DM, also collect inspiration points and farm them to change the setting for the worst. Okay, you're in a boat, a storm rolls in. I'm going to spend 3 inspiration points and I'm going to have a storm roll in. That's shitty, but of course you can't just have a storm randomly show up. These sailors are professionals. They would have been able to tell the weather. So something must be causing it. And it just opens up more narratives. And I just think systems like that with action points and threat points, inspiration points, I think having that as a currency to change the narrative, now you get players that are like, oh, we could change the narrative. Okay. With my campaign, Death of the Deities, I didn't write any of it. I wrote the setting and I gave them a problem in the very beginning. And then I said, I want you guys to write your characters' backgrounds. And based off of the decisions they make along the way, I'm kind of pulling a Mass Effect here. I keep track of every decision they make, every person they talk to, and just what they want to see their character go through. I have them write their own stories in Discord and tell me a little bit like, this is the path I want to go through. Like my Cleric of Ilmater, Banvar, he's like, I want to somehow, I devise that it doesn't make sense that there's 2 books of Vile Darknesses in the world or 2 books of Book of Exalted Deeds, right? So the way that I wrote it is, if you can recreate the book, it basically makes the other book inert. There can only ever be one at a time. And the guy who was playing Banvar, my cleric, said, what I would love, because he's morally impenetrable, is that while having the Book of Vile Darkness to try to study it to find out how to defeat Vecna, What if he was tempted by the book? So then we went exploring this whole arc about how it tempted him, like the One Ring did. And then he ended up succeeding and turned it into the Book of Exalted Deeds. Like he rewrote everything. And I loved it because that really brought out this wonderful storyline of how necromancy is not evil. It's not. When you heal a character, what magic are you using? What school of magic is it? It's necromancy. You know, you're defying death. And it's important to have that delineation of like I always tell my group, it's kind of like cloning. With the technology to clone, we could make backup organs for us at a cheaper rate and then immediately have a liver on standby in case we ever needed it. The downfall to cloning is in the wrong hands. You know, great power comes with great responsibility. You can create an evil army to kill all the Jedi, you know, and I know that's just kind of like a vague, you know, generalization of it, but I like that morally ambiguous. Necromancy is good, but in the wrong hands, it's bad.
Yeah, but, you know, talking about darkish settings, like I grew up watching movies like The Dark Crystal and, you know, Legend and things like that, that were, yeah, they're kids' movies, but there's a darkness to them. And I don't just mean, you know, oh, there's, you know, lightning crackling in the distance and, ooh, you know, there's a nefarious, you know, character. But I mean, like, if you watch The Dark Crystal, it literally sucks something's life essence out of its eyeballs to like, you know, live off of that power. That's a pretty dark, that's a dark story for something that you're telling to kids. So I grew up with those kinds of things as my introduction to fantasy. So, you know, when I run my games, that's definitely kind of what I gravitate more towards is, you know, when there's magic, it's dark. It has a cost, you know, it's dangerous. You know, and the problems that these people are going through, they need to feel grounded to me in order to be interesting. And honestly, there's plenty of stuff from real life that's dark. You know, that's just kind of the way real life is sometimes. And exploring those things is interesting to me. So I like characters that bring those kinds of things into my games. Like if somebody wants to play, you know, the goofy drunk barbarian who's always knocking over the table and all that, like that's fine. I'm okay with that. But give me something about him that's going on that is, you know, a little bit that I can draw from later on in the story so that we can make him a little more well-rounded.
Yeah, the dark settings is something that when I first played D&D, I played second edition with like a guy who's played AD&D when it first kind of came out. And
back when kobolds were dogs.
But I remember like being introduced into D&D as like, this is a deadly world and you've got to be real careful about what you do because there's dragons and all kinds of, you know, magic's dangerous. And then not reading, but like watching movies and books and stuff like that on darker settings. And I just finished the Legend of Dritz trilogy. And I was like, that's an aspect of D&D that I've missed in a lot of the games that I've been a part of. A lot of the times because we're all just kind of hanging out and being goofy. So I liked how you guys mentioned the darker settings like that. Viva Voca.
Well,
Viva.
I think it's also the age. You know what, Jeremy? I'm gonna say this. I call it the hold my beer mentality. So in 3.5, everybody had just gotten done like watching Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and they were like, "Oh man, Harry Potter's so scary and dark." And I'm like, "Hold my beer." Right? Because trust me, like we grew up with Excalibur. We grew up with Dark Crystal. We grew up with The Labyrinth being a kid's movie where the premise of The Labyrinth is a grown-ass man peers in the window of a 16-year-old girl, steals the baby, and then blackmails her and says, "I'll give you your baby back, but you have to give yourself to me mentally and physically," which nowadays would never fly as a movie. Like The Labyrinth would never be released nowadays because that is like, I mean, that's like really freaking crossing the line.
You want to say problematic?
Yeah, right. Like you can't say that. You can't do that. And it's not that we're more PC. It's that I think, and that's the thing. The grognards, they're coming back again in my lingo here. They're always like, we had people getting flayed alive and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, don't hate the game, because we as a people are listening to our minority groups and welcoming them to the game. Okay. We always thought growing up, me nerd, 13-year-old James sitting there in 2002, or no, I'm sorry. Oh God, I'm older than that. In 1999.
I was about to say 2002.
But listen, I don't know my own age. Okay. I was 35 2 years in a row and didn't even realize it. But the thing is that what a lot of people need to realize is that you shouldn't shame the fact that we are trying to welcome more people into the hobby, because we are listening to them, and we're not just hearing them, we're listening. The difference between the word hear and listen. Hearing is, I am hearing the words you say, but I am not understanding, or I'm shutting off my viewpoints to never listen to you. But I think that we as a community, these gatekeepers of the hobby who have been gatekeepers for years, are now opening the gates and welcoming more people into the hobby. So the fantasy setting has definitely welcomed more people into the hobby, where it's not okay to have a movie like Labyrinth. But that doesn't mean that thirst for that darker setting isn't there. Look at The Witcher and its success.
Sure.
Look at Dragon Age and its success. Mass Effect and its success. Look at some of the darker themes that Star Trek has been exploring the last 20 years. Look at I'm sorry, but Deep Space Nine was heavy. It was dark. Compared to other Star Treks. And it's something that's still there. It's an itch. Game of Thrones came out. Everybody was floored. Last of Us is blowing even Walking Dead's records out of the water. And it's way more dark than Walking Dead. There's still a first one.
I think the part of that, though, is kind of going back to what Nate was saying earlier about storytelling being intrinsic. I think that these darker tones going on in storytelling shows a greater emotional maturity in its audience, because the people who are only watching reality television, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
It's because it's not asking anything from them. Yeah. All they have to do is consume. It's empty calories. It's, they don't have to engage.
Ooh, I like that.
So yeah, it's an emotionally shallow engagement, but these stories that you have to really kind of pay attention and empathize with to a certain degree, they require a certain higher level of emotional maturity. And I think as a society, I'm hoping as a society, we're kind of shifting to where that's the majority of people.
For sure. Yeah. I think definitely, I feel like at least in my circles, I'm seeing exactly what you're saying. We're kind of shifting back into where we're actually thinking about, we're not just watching the TV because it's a thing to do. It's these are engaging, interesting stories being shown to us in a palatable way. And it makes us think about certain choices and question morality. What is morality, and why is it even, why am I so interested in it? What about this story connects with me to the point where I want to sit down and like you mentioned, Erasmus, just chew on it for a little bit, try to figure it out. And I think we're definitely shifting towards that way. It's a pendulum. We're always moving. So I think we're going to hit that.
And Lady Vengeance brings up there's an intellect to him. I agree, but I think the one thing that was missing is relatability, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why in the late 90s, Batman's popularity started to skyrocket over Superman. And it's because Superman is a god among men who can never do any wrong. And you can't relate to that. But you could relate to Batman wanting to punch a criminal's face into the ground because of how the people that they hurt. And that relatability is key. And there's an important part of that in the tabletop scene, where when I was growing up in the 90s, I was like, I want to be a character who's nothing like me. For me, it was exploring the characters in a way that this is nothing like me. I'm a strong and beautiful man. I have all of these traits that I care. charisma was my dump stat in my characters, but I, as a person, am a very charismatic person. And at the same time, it's like, you know, I've never had a problem with stage theater or anything like that. But the one thing I learned in theater is that what makes a role truly unique is that you bring a little bit of yourself into it. Because if you bring a little bit of yourself into it, then it becomes more real. Okay. So now we have a community where we're welcoming to the LGBTQ community. We're welcoming to female players. We're welcoming to minority groups joining because they bring a little bit of themselves to their roles. And that is so key, not to only relating to the characters and propelling the story, but it's key for us to evolve and accept people of different groups. It is huge. It is huge. This is massive. This is something we need to embrace. And it's frustrating when you play these happy-go-lucky fairy tales like Disney. I call it Disney fairy tales, right? You look at Snow White and everything, but you forget that those stories were originally written by the Brothers Grimm, and they are fucking terrible. Like some of them are Witcher level dark and creepy. Like the Hansel and Gretel, the kids go skipping off, leaving a bread trail, and then they talk to a stranger witch who tries to eat them alive. And then the cookies in the field, you know, at the end of the Hansel and Gretel Disney fight, the moment they burn the witch, the cookies break free and all the people are like, oh, you saved us. But in the actual story tale, it was like, no, they're dead. You know, Hansel and Gretel barely made it out of there alive. Like,
there's
dead.
no bringing them back.
There's no bringing it back. There has to be some risk. And if you want that, if you want people to bring a little bit of themselves in the character and make the characters more relatable, then you also have to make the story more real. And I think the problem is in the 90s, we were celebrating the end of the Cold War. We hadn't seen a great war in years. The people who were around in the 90s that were teenagers, they didn't know a hard life if it hit them in the face. And I'm not saying that they didn't have hard lives, but I mean, like, I'm talking global war.
Yeah.
And then now we're teenagers when one event happened that woke everybody up. And it seems like it's not connected, but it very much is. And that's the World Trade Center. When that occurred, our little protective bubble,
it shattered reality.
Well, to go back to kind of what you were saying about, like, you know, the inclusivity and in the reason why these stories, I think, are becoming so much more enjoyable. I mean, we live vicariously whenever we watch, you know, a television show or a movie, you know, or read a book or comic, whatever, or even more so whenever we play a role-playing game. You know, we get the chance to explore and engage with things that we wouldn't in normal life. And that includes other people's emotional journeys. We get to see what it's like, a practice run, if you will, to lose a loved one, to explore our gender identity. You know, all of these things, it's a method of kind of practicing this experience in a safe way. So if we fall, it's not going to hurt real bad because everything's fictional anyways. But we're actually going through that training in an emotional and mental way so that when and if we face those things in real life, we feel like we have some understanding, some grasp on what that's going to involve. And I think it's really good for us. You know, there's a quote by Mark Twain, and I can never remember it verbatim, but it's basically like the biggest weapon against prejudice is travel. It is going out of your little corner of the world and understanding that all of these different people are a lot more like you than you want to admit.
And that's huge. I can definitely, I like that a lot. You know, like most people in the modern age, we're the most mobile generation of humans ever to be in existence. Most people never leave 100 miles from where they're born, you know. And definitely that quote there, I know which one you're talking about. Being able to, like, that there is key to the exploratory aspect of human nature. I feel like humans were constantly trying to understand, how far can I go? What's too far? Why is it too far? And being able to explore a lot of those ideas, especially if you have the right group with you. And I think that's why role-playing for D&D or whatever system you're using can be hugely beneficial, not just for, oh yeah, now I know the game better, or now I can write a story of my own. You know, if I wanted to write a novel or something like that, I can explore these kind of things. It's the idea that I am the act of exploring. You know, it's like working out a muscle. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and the more reps you put in, the more heavy loads you can lift. That's the way I like to think of it. But 100%,
You
I
know,
like it.
and to kind of expand on that idea too,
Mm-hmm.
I know we're kind of talking about relatability. We always bring a little of ourselves into our character now, whereas previously I was He-Man, you know, which was not me at all. But bringing a little bit of yourself, it's a very vulnerable
Yes.
task.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get with a group of people and they are all vulnerable together, it makes you feel safer. We can all be vulnerable with one another, and we can have, you know, like, oh, you're a male character, you're a male Jeremy, but you're playing a female. Okay. Now I expect you to behave like a female, but I don't have to sit there and check him on it, right? I know that he can play a female. Whereas, and I call this the free effect. Prior to games like World of Warcraft, a male wouldn't be caught dead playing a female. You know what I mean? Like, even my little 12-year-old groups, it's like, you're a girl? Ew! D&D back then was like, are there girls at the tavern? Because if there are, I want to do them. You know, we all saw the Summoner Geeks video. And that was the old mentality. But now I don't have a problem with red cards. Like, when I have people at my table and they put a little of themselves there, I realize now that what I do to that character, I'm doing to that person in some degree.
It's a very personal thing.
Right. Yeah, it's very personal, and I have no problem with that. Red cards are easy. But what I love telling people when they join my campaign is I'm like, you will cry. Dimension 119 was one of the newest players. And I was like, Dimension, you will cry. I will make you cry. And I've made him cry several times during the campaign. I'm like, because if you can't emotionally cry when a beloved NPC or a character dies, and I do have death, and I do make it very strict. I don't like how 5th edition, it's like, oh, well, I've got a diamond, so I guess you're not dead. Get the fuck out of here. I went to K Jewelers, so I guess I don't have to worry about it. Like, no, you're robbing the risk of the game. And it makes people cry rivers of tears when they watch their friend die. And then what I always tell people is death is not the end of your story. Death is your glory moment. Okay. We all remember watching the movie Gladiator. The end of that movie was powerful, but Maximus died, but it was powerful. So I always encourage, if you're going to have death in your setting and you're going to say this is a deadly campaign, even though your player may drop round 4 and the combat lasts 16 rounds, revisit that. Don't kill him outright. Revisit him having his Boromir moment of, did I save the little ones? Give me that moment. I want to see it. I want you to make people cry. That is huge.
There was this great idea that somebody had introduced, and I cannot for the life of me remember where I heard this, but they said that they used the half hit point rule, where it's, if you're dead as a PC, you're not actually dead. You're dead for all intents and purposes, but you're at half a hit point. You know, and we're going to have the moment when you lose that last half a hit point, but it's going to be, you know, a narrative scene.
Yeah. Yeah. The going out in a Blades of Glory thing is something that I don't see a lot of DMs do in whatever media that I'm watching. I heard not really a similar rule, but another thing where it's like, you know, if you're mid battle and you get struck down, you have like a little bit past your 0 point to just like, you have that one last round in you to just do something, right? Make it beautiful, make it intense. And I liked that idea a lot as well. Especially for like a barbarian or something crazy.
Yeah.
It's like, you have that, all right, you're down to 0 hit points. You don't just drop and go, eh. It's like, you know, you're dead. You know you're dying. But what are you going to do with your last 6 seconds of life?
Yeah, and there's different ways to capture that, and I kind of mix
Mhm.
it up as a DM so that my players never know what I'm going to pull out of my hat. And one of the things I'll do is I'll tell myself, okay, I'm going to give this character one last combat round.
Mhm.
And I tell them, you have one combat round. You can move. You can move 8 rounds. I don't care. You can stumble around the battlefield holding your wounds, but I'm only going to let you attack one more time. And when you do attack, I'm going to have every attack be a nat 20, and I'm going to have the dice max out
And
so that
you're swinging for the
come
fences.
walking
Yeah.
across the battlefield. And then they go toe to toe with the big bad who's like, you puny mortal. It's like puny, crit, max damage, fall to my knee, die. The other option is tell them they're dead, but let them, if you do group inspiration like I do, let them spend an inspiration point to stay active one more round. They're going to die regardless, but let them stay active one more round with that group inspiration. Another way you could spend the meta currency.
Yeah.
And just
I like that.
Death is not the end of a story. In many cases, it's just the beginning. And I know that sounds so bizarre because our board game and video game mentality is you died,
you die and then you respawn at the last checkpoint. Yeah.
Right. But it's like, no, because if you study history, some of the most profound movements came from the death of a hero.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So let them make a new character. Let them explore the world in this character's eyes, but let them witness as a third person what their death has done for the entire campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
Like, give them that at least.
Yeah, I mean, definitely exploring darker themes in role play, and like y'all mentioned before, like it's you're playing with this idea in a safe way, you know, because you aren't going to go around and start swinging axes at people, you know, just because you think they're bad or they've wronged your family or something. But playing with those ideas and those themes in a safe way where you can start, you know, if you built these relationships and now they're at a, you know, they're a string of health, you know, they're blinking red, and it's like, what are you going to do about it? You know, it gets your mind thinking in a different way, I think. Definitely fun stuff. We all, you know, we mentioned a lot about skills in D&D, and skills are one of the things that I have, like you mentioned, Jarl, I wish it was more in depth. And from what I understand, like 3.5, I've never played it, but it was a lot more going on as far as skills though. And I know like for me in 5th edition, it's like I wish there was more things I can, like, maybe it's a min-maxy thing where I want to really specialize and fine tune in something, or maybe just one of my players want to do something and I'm like, I guess we'll toss it into sleight of hand, or I guess it'll kind of encompass intimidation or what's it called, or stealth, survival, something like that. What do you guys like? What kind of insights do you have on skills? How would DMs make it better? How could a player kind of work on explaining what skill they're trying to use or what they want to do? How would you guys handle that kind of situation?
I'm going to let Jeremy take this one first because I have a lot to say about that.
Okay.
Jarl has a lot to say. No.
I think first and foremost, like, handle it as a narrative description first. Like, I think I'm a big proponent of that anyways. Players, don't look at your character sheet and decide what you're going to do. Like, tell me what it is that you want to do. We'll figure out how to get the mechanics to get us there, to find out what the outcome is going to be. And especially with skills, like, describe what your character is doing. How are you engaging in this particular situation? And then let's retroactively decide kind of what skill or skills best fit that. A lot of the times I will ask for 2 to 3 different skills and just ask them to tell me which one they would prefer. You know, because I think, you know, this and this could both potentially work here. So you tell me what you're going to use and then work that into your description. But also, like, using the rule about skills not always being tied to their parent attribute, like being able to make a strength based intimidation roll instead of a charisma based one, like that kind of thing. I think that helps to open up that kind of somewhat limited skill tree, and make it a lot more applicable in more situations. I am also a huge proponent of sometimes just not needing a roll.
Yes.
There's a lot more situations that I would rather handle just with a narrative description alone. If it's something that is well within your character's wheelhouse, you shouldn't really have to roll for it, in my opinion. Unless it's just going to be this epic, kind of moment. But
to that point too, the player's handbook and the DMG recommend that.
Yeah,
like if it's something that they can easily do, the only time they should roll if there's a chance of failure.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, that idea there. One of my biggest pet peeves as a DM is, instead of describing, hey, I'm going to say this or I'm going to do this, it's like, I roll for stealth. And it's like, well, you might not have to roll for stealth, or you might not have to roll persuasion. Just like, what are you saying? How are you going about the situation? Like, I know from experience, if you have a clipboard in your hand and a badge, you can get in just about anywhere. You don't necessarily have to, okay, well, I roll for stealth and I roll for this. And it's like, well, let's see what you're doing first. And then we'll see what rolls correspond with what we're trying to do here.
So I do three things. It's a little harder to do online in the virtual tabletop, but at my home games, I custom make the sheets to where I bring back all the 3-5 skills. And then what I do is I go, okay, so thievery, like sleight of hand. What is sleight of hand? Because the old 3-5 had pickpocketing, had open lock, forgery, right? So what I do is I say, okay, well, these fall under that sleight of hand category. These fall under that intimidate category. So if your class is proficient in intimidation, then you are proficient in these 3 skills that I would say are part of intimidation. If you're skilled in sleight of hand, then I would say these 3 skills from 3-5 you're proficient in. No ranking, no ranks at all. Just what are you proficient in? And I kind of add more skills. Hard to do in the VTT world. Number 2, tell me your description. Okay. And what I do with it is, if you describe the scene and you're smart about it and you're amazing and it's wonderful, I'll have you roll, because bottom line is, players that don't like to roll if it means that they'll fail on something they shouldn't. I 100%. A good example is the adventuring. Why would you ask a rogue to jump up a wall or whatever? My rogue wants to Assassin's Creed his way up the wall. Okay. The fact of the matter is, some people just like rolling. They want to see that fat skill bonus for acrobatics come into play. Okay, well, you're a trained rogue. This is a simple wall with lots of windows, shelves, and like gutters and stuff. You're not going to fail. I will not have you fail. But I might have you roll to see how fast you climb up the wall, to see if you get away from the guards that are chasing you, or whether or not your roll is low, how noisy you were. I'll just give you, if you roll really high on your acrobatics, then you made it, you were quiet, you were fast, nobody saw. But it's the DC rule is entirely based on your description. If you throw a rock at a pot across the street to cause a distraction, and then you acrobatics your way up the building, I'm going to count that, and I'm going to say the DC is 10. Super low.
Right.
How you roll, you're going to succeed no matter what, because please, like a normal lock, not even a masterwork lock, like some old lady, like, you adventurers always coming by and ruining things. Out of here. Leave my treasure alone. And if the rogue's like, oh, that old lady has a treasure, that old lady's not going to have a legendary lock on her door. Right? You're going to pick the lock. But when I have you roll for your thievery skill or your thieves tools, right? It's not whether or not you unlock the door. It's how fast you do it, and it's whether or not you were seen. Because you are, after all, in the middle of town picking somebody's lock. So that's kind of what I play into it. But I'll go ahead and do it. But there has to be some sort of consequence.
Exactly.
100% you'll pick the lock. That's not the consequences. The consequence is she standing right there at the doorway? Take your shoes off. Is she is a guard going to see you? You know what I mean? But if it's something super benign, like I want to slip the stolen goods into this guy's baggy backpack, or I'm going to go up to his mule and just slip it in, I'm not going to have you roll. If I do anything, I'll probably just have you roll, a persuasion check, something charismatic.
Mm-hmm.
You're not gonna sneak up to a donkey to drop the item in the bag, because people are gonna be like, "What is that guy doing over there?"
Why is that guy crouching everywhere? Oh wait, where'd he go?
But I might have you roll a charisma persuasion because you drop the item in the sack, and then you're like, "Oh," or like a performance, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like Jeremy said, what I love about what Jeremy said is, don't just make performance charisma. What about interpretive dance? That's a very physical activity. Make it a strength performance. If you're trying to lift up a stone bench to get money, strength performance, or in athletics, whichever one works. But I always, if I'm going to make my players roll, to me, it doesn't depend on whether or not they succeed. It's that somebody saw you, and I might not even say anything. I might just have that person go, "I saw you break into the old woman's house. Give me what you took from there, and I won't tell anybody." You know what I mean? Like, okay, I guess we're going to have to kill these guys now, or, "Oh, please don't hurt me. Take my," but at the same time, it's just like, the rolls do need to have consequences. No, they shouldn't roll for if the rogue wants to be stealthy going upstairs. I always tell people, I automatically assume you're stealthy.
Right. That's your thing.
Right. That's even a party going, "We're in a strange castle." I'm automatically going to assume you guys are trying to be quiet. Okay. The only one I'll have roll is the one wearing the heavy armor. Right. Because the dwarf in chainmail is going to be like,
really trying.
Because they're really trying, right?
They're really
but trying. It's like, if there's tension, if there's a scene, it's great. If you're in the middle of the woods and you're fucking with other players, just steal their item, as long as it's not malicious and it doesn't become a habit. I'm there for it, right?
Players hate when you steal shit from them.
And then I also have, good consequences. Maybe when you drop something in the bag, member of the Thieves Guild notices and then hires you for a job. Maybe it's not all bad consequences. Maybe it's a mixture of things. But
I like that.
Too many rolling for no reason. Like, are you really going to make your paladin roll a religion check for something that is common knowledge, even if it's not their god? No, right. I'm a Christian man, but I study theology. So I know how the Islamic faith operates. I know how Buddhism operates. My wife is Wiccan. I understand the Wiccan faith because I get religion. I understand it. I understand the concept. If somebody was like, "Oh, your wife is Wiccan. Are you sure she's going to make, like this gift? And I've been married to her for 20 years.
It's like, I think I got it.
I think I got it. I roll a 1. "Here, babe, here's this plant," and then light it on fire in front of her and go, "Nature sucks," and then spike it down and be like, "Yeah." Or get her a bunch of crucifixes to hang up. "I got you some Celtic knot crucifixes." Like, that's tasteless. I would never do that. That doesn't make any sense. Now, how impressed she's going to be. Maybe as a DM, I'd like to see a roll. How fast did you knock the wind out of your wife when you gave her this gift? She's going to like it no matter what, but what's her impression of it? I want to see a roll. Good consequences.
Definitely.
Yeah, Scott Dog, me covered in heavy chains of suffering. Yeah.
And on the skills thing, the other thing that I don't see a lot of people talk about are the attributes. Like, what really is the difference of a 10 intelligence and a 20 intelligence, right? Like, because in my mind, if a character has 20 intelligence, they have cheat codes. You know what I mean? Like, they see the world completely different than I do. Of course, as a DM, you have a different purview, but I can see if a character, I'm tossing out intelligence here, but even if the player doesn't have a 20 intelligence, it's like your character would know something about this isn't right, or just statistically speaking, this would happen in this way if certain things, you know what I mean? How would you guys deal with those massive separations between a 3 intelligence, 10, whatever it is.
I think I'll answer your question with a question. Have you ever played Baldur's Gate 3?
No.
So there's a scene in Baldur's Gate 3 where you're walking around this city that's being attacked by goblins and ogres, and you encounter an ogre who's like talking to his people, and he's like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to flank to the right, 90-degree turn. We're going to go 15 paces. He sounds hella smart. Like, this thing is smart. When you come down and interact with him, if your charisma's high enough, you can have an actual, like, really high intellectual conversation with him. You're like, how is this possible? The other ogres are like picking their butt and smelling their finger, like, how did this ogre be like this? When you kill him, you realize, oh, he has a crown of intellect that gives you 18 intellect. Right. My rule of thumb is 10 is average. Just because you have a 10, it doesn't mean you're dumb. Just because you have a 10, it doesn't mean you can't piece together or understand astrophysics. It's just that you lack the ability to sit in your room and think about astrophysics in a correct manner.
But if someone explains it to you, it's like, all right, I could probably, I can pick up what you're putting down.
Like the gauntlets of ogre strength, I believe bumps it up to 20 or 18, something like that. But I always viewed 20 as like demigod status. Once you hit 20, and if you're talking about, oh, this is a football player, okay, what would a football player's strength be? In my mind, it's 14, 15. It's a +2 modifier. You got a guy who works on a fishing boat. He may have a 12 or 13 +1 strength, right? He does a lot of lifting of the nets. He's stronger than your average peasant. And then you have somebody like 15 or 16 and 17, that +3 modifier. That's when you get the Olympians, the people who are really good at sports and who just really shock and awe with their strength. And then you have 20 and beyond, which is I'm lifting up benches with one hand while people are sitting in them. And that's the kind of scaling that I do. When you get down to like the 3 or 2 intelligence, it's not that these creatures are stupid. It's just that they're not book smart. A cat and a dog is very cunning, but when you look at their intelligence, you're like, yikes. That doesn't mean that they don't speak their own language, that they can't be trained to be smart animals. It's just that they can't tell you math. They don't understand math. If you put 5 stones in front of them and say, take 3 away, the dog's going to pick up 1 stone and be like, that doesn't mean it's a stupid animal. It just means it doesn't have that type of intellect.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty concise, honestly. I tend to I use a lot of like tropes and things like that I have learned from a lot of consuming media, stories from television, movies, and things like that. And usually I use a lot of art in my games. So I draw a lot from that, more so than the stats. Usually whenever I have to stat something out, I will try to make sure that I use stats that reflect the character that I think needs to come out when I play the character. But I pull a lot from the art that I choose to represent them. It gives me a lot about their mannerisms, how smart they are, their understanding of a given situation, their wealth. I get a lot of information on how I want to portray them based on kind of what I see. And then also just in the moment, there's a lot of organic development that happens whenever I'm playing an NPC or just a new character in general at the table. But I think for me, as far as how to portray those different things, whenever it comes to something like intelligence or charisma, a lot of it is just about like word choices. Sure. Well, there you go. I'm showing you my low intelligence.
No, you know what? Just like George Bush, we're going to make that a canon word. That goes with
word usage or word choice. That's what happens whenever you live inside my head. But yeah, those things are important. Vocabulary, inflection, tone, pattern of speaking, all of those kinds of things I use as a way of portraying higher or lower within those different attributes. Whether it's accurate or not, who the hell knows? It's probably about as accurate as anything else that I do in the chair. So
For sure. Yeah, that's just always been one of those things where, like, especially more so early on when I first started playing D&D, it was a lot of, oh, you have, what's it? You have like an 8 strength. Oh, you're so weak. Like, how can you even get out of bed? It's like, I mean, yeah, 8 strength is weak, but that's like someone who just doesn't go to the gym and has like an office job.
Right? I think most Americans with
Most
their
Americans.
obesity epidemic are like 6'7" strength, you know?
Right.
Like man, in high school, when I did PE all the time, I used to do weights
yeah.
because in my mind it was easy.
Mhm.
I was able to lift a ton more. I was 135
Mhm.
pounds. Was able to lift a ton more. I'm 199, 202 on a bad day. And I can't even like, you know, that mentality. My wife has this mentality. I call it the man mentality, but that's an overgeneralization. Where when you're getting groceries out of your car, how many trips do you take?
I take as
Right?
many as needed, to be honest.
As many as needed. Well, my wife
Yeah.
takes one. She's got a bad hip and a bad back, and she'll put as many goddamn bags on her arm. I tried
Load her
to
up.
do it. Yeah, one. You see, yeah, your wife right there. One. My wife will absolutely shit on me because I'm getting to that age where I'm starting to realize I'm getting old. I put on 3 bags and I grab a gallon of milk and I'm like, oh, but I'm trying to look like a man in front of my wife. We may have been together for a while, but goddamn, I want to look muscular. So I puff my chest and I'm carrying it. I'm like, ugh. And there was a question that I saw in chat that this kind of ties to. The Adventuring said something good. Some stats never come up like con, and I think that's tragic. I think Constitution needs to indicate how long you can run, right? Let's take Lord of the Rings, for example. Okay. I'm sorry, but when you see that scene in Lord of the Rings where they're all running away from the goblins, who do you think should have outpaced the entire group?
Never seen the movie. I don't know.
It's Gimli.
That's an Erasmus.
It's the dwarf, right? The dwarf always goes, we didn't ride horses. We're natural sprinters. The dwarf should have been in the front, not even getting tired. The hobbits should have been in the front because they drink all the time and they live a very hardy lifestyle. They live in the roots. They should have been the first ones. Old man Gandalf going, should not be outrunning everybody else. I'm sorry. That should not happen. And Legolas, who's very light, very skinny, very dexterous. I'm sorry, but after a half a mile of running at full neck break speed while shooting, Legolas should be exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's up to the DM to incorporate those themes, because the other one that I get a lot is charisma. Well, I don't have to have a high charisma because I'm a great role player. 100% I agree with you. If you want to role play somebody who's really good at talking, I don't require you to have high charisma. But charisma, in my mind, is the ease in which people have to accept what you are saying. So if I won't even ask for a roll, I'll just, what is the charisma modifier? Okay, instead of a handful of people picking their nose listening to you, which would be a single digit charisma modifier, like you're just not that interesting. A good example is Ben Stein. Very smart man. Ben Stein is very like, people love Ben Stein, but I'm sorry, dry eyes. That's not charismatic. He's not going to hold people's attention for long. They're going to file out. But if somebody has charisma, high charisma, have them eating, the people eating out of their hands. You know what I mean? Like, let them role play it. Don't ask them to roll it, but let those stats that gets ignored come into play. Wisdom. It's always perception based and stuff. Well, wisdom for me is common sense too. So even being in a new culture, a character with high charisma and high wisdom, I will tell them, you know, culturally, this wouldn't be acceptable. You know that with this culture, that wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah,
you know,
you can socially identify. Yeah, that's probably not a good idea.
And then with dexterity and strength, I don't really think they need any more attention because it's built into combat.
Yeah. Yeah,
but at
those
the
ones
same
are
time,
easier to pin down.
Yeah. And I always go, okay, well, I would say, you know, let's take me. My constitution is probably, my wife would tell you it's a 2, but, you know, I'll give myself a generous 7. If there's a rope in a gym and you want me to climb up the rope, a third of the way up the rope, I'm going, Strength just means how much rope you pass in one. Charisma's
Sure,
how
sure.
long you could, or Constitution's how long you could do it, and
Now-
that does need to come into play.
Now, with that idea, if there was like, I don't know, a rabid monkey chasing after you and climbing after the rope, would you be able to dig deep and get up the rope to wherever you need to go, or would that factor into gameplay as far
I am
as
so
kind
glad
of...
you asked this question, because I had somebody in my Star Wars campaign do something to me that I was just like, holy crap. They aren't very strong. They don't have a whole lot of endurance, right? But they're very dexterous characters. And I'm like, these trained pirates are coming after you and they see the rope you're on. You can't cut the rope because you're using it. They're going to come down the rope after you, right? Well, the character just sat there and listened and goes, okay, here's what I'm going to do. A little bit of Cirque du Olay. I'm going to pick up the rope and wrap it around me and rope dance my way down using my dexterity. You win. You win D&D. Congratulations. I love that. So they coiled the rope around him and then jumped off the edge and spun down the length of the rope. 100%. That's something that people can do in real life. You know, totally on board. Use your acrobatics for that. That's amazing. And then these pirates are like using their strength and they're just not as fast as you. You found a clever way around it.
Yeah, that's definitely a topic that I keep running into whenever I run games. Is like, where do I kind of put those? Where do I kind of line all that kind of stuff up? Another thing that always interests me as far as kind of running games and stuff are things like downtime activities. And I talked with Erasmus about this in our last podcast. It seems like 5th edition doesn't give me a lot of resources as a DM to say like, hey, you're in a town for 2 weeks. What are you guys going to do? What kind of things can the characters, can they hire people to come along with them? Are they working on a local business that they bought? Like those little aspects to the game, I feel, or maybe I'm just not looking in the right place also, which is absolutely fair. But
I will say they did in the DMG, they have 4 pages to downtime activities.
Yeah.
And it kind of points you in the right direction. Right.
Yeah.
But my advice to you, Viva, is explore a style of game setting called West Marches. Now, typically with West Marches, you have 2 players who are there every time, and then you have other players kind of come in and filter out. You know, it's a D&D game that
interesting.
You've got your active players, and then you have your players. I do West Marches, but my players love the game so much they're fixed, right? But the principle behind West Marches is you have a hometown. That's your hometown. Like, don't tell me there isn't hometown pride nowadays. That's bullshit. Look how much people fight for their football teams, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Look at the riots that get started when their nation loses a World Cup. You know, there is hometown pride. And I think that's one thing that is really neglecting in D&D is that hometown pride. So I always start off this hometown pride. All the businesses start at level 1, but you can invest gold in them to level them up. A level 1 business will not have plate mail. Right?
Yeah.
They will eventually get plate mail, but they won't have it. It's a poor little town. So now they have gold to invest. The moment that they invest into the town, the downtime activities become so much easier for the party to get behind because they're invested in this place and its people.
Literally, yeah.
I don't know, Jeremy. I know, Jeremy, I've seen a lot of your games that are 1-shots or 3-shots, but how do you handle downtime activities?
A lot of it just depends on the type of story that we're trying to tell. Sometimes it's as simple as you're rolling through town. What is it that you want to try to accomplish while you're here? You know, do you have something that you really need? Is it simply just, renewing rations and, making sure that you have a warm, dry place to sleep? If so, we can probably just skip through that. But if it's a story that's supposed to be built around, the ratcheting up of tension or, the increasing mystery of something that's going on, then we might not skip that kind of stuff because it might be important who you talk to, where you're going, what you might be discovering. but I ran a campaign for my in-person group called White Lotus Black Jade. That was it took place in an Asian inspired
Love it.
kingdom of my home world, or one of my home worlds, and I wanted the effect of a winter settling in, making it so that you cannot travel for 3 months. Like, it's just going to become impossible. What does that look like? And I let my players know that it was coming, because again, their characters knew that. They have grown up here. It's happened every year. So you can tell that we're getting to the point in the year where eventually you're no longer going to be able to progress on this quest path that you've been on. It's just going to be a matter of when your time runs out. So if you want to take time to do this little side thing, that's fine. Just understand you may not get as far before winter sets in. And so when we got to that point, I was like, okay, you have 3 months of living in this village where you can't go anywhere. So what I want is from each of you to tell me, 2-3 things that are happening to your character over the course of that time. And you can either roll randomly on the chart that's kind of presented in the DMG, or we can just work something out that makes sense for how you spent that time. And then we'll do some rolls to determine how that all went. Mm-hmm. And then we'll touch on the outcome of that. Now you are married, or now you have, a large amount of wealth because you did really well in the gambling house, whatever. Yeah, most of the time I'm a lot more comfortable with kind of letting people handle that in a narrative way, because to me, that's an opportunity for them to tell me something about what's important to their character.
Yeah.
To flesh them out as a real person, instead of only relying on what the game has told them they have access to.
For sure. I like that a lot.
Yeah. That's really cool. That reminds me, Jeremy, do you know much about the history of Independence Rock, Wyoming?
I don't. That sounds intriguing.
So Independence Rock, Wyoming was named Independence Rock because when people were going on the Oregon Trail from the East Coast, if you arrived on Independence Day at this place in Wyoming, then you would have enough time to cross the mountains before winter came. But if you arrived at Independence Rock and you were late, even by a handful of days, you stayed there until the following spring and then went out. Unless you're the Donner Party and you're like, I'm going out anyway. Right? And then they got trapped. Things like that, like bringing those real world inspirations. It could be like, we have to get to Independence Rock before July 4th, right? Mm-hmm. And if the party doesn't make it in time and they booked it, then they get rewarded with, what did you do in this downtime while you guys didn't have very much money and supplies? Maybe that's a campaign in itself to roleplay them being stuck in this town and not being able to continue. And it's literally downtime. You cannot continue on your journey. Let's explore that. Let's do something great. And one advice I have for downtime, and Viva, I guarantee you this will be amazing. Create holidays for your world.
Yes, absolutely. I loved that idea when I first heard it not too long ago, but because most holidays are tied to some either cultural event or some religious reason to holiday, and then sometimes it's just like hey, it's after winter, we need to see who else is around after, who survived the winter, so we'll throw a big old feast, we'll call it a big thing. And it's all right, we'll do a head count, and that's a good thing to celebrate. And with all different, deities and stuff, damn well they want to be celebrated on holidays, and they're going to come up with a bunch of reasons for it.
And steal resources from other games. There's a beautiful game called Sagas of the Icelanders. And in Sagas of the Icelanders, after you were done with your raids and you got back, you helped wrap up the harvest season. And depending on how well you did and how well the farmers did, that winter could be amazing Or that
like that.
winter could be terrible, and they had stats and rules for it. Incorporate from other games, 100%.
Yeah.
My faction-based
Yeah,
system I
absolutely.
use for D&D is from the game called Stars Without Numbers. Very robust faction-based system. Incorporate things like that.
For sure. Yeah, I'm starting to branch out and kind of look at other systems. One in particular, there was a Kickstarter not too long ago for Avatar: The Last Airbender tabletop roleplay game, and I got the books. I got all the fun stuff about that, and I didn't know this before buying it. Not that it would deter me at all, but it's based on like a D6 system where it's, instead of saying, hey, I do this action that's kind of outlined in attacks or whatever it is, it's almost solely narrative driven. Like if you want to do something, you do something, and then you inflict and
I'm just messing with you.
you inflict certain conditions during like combat or any altercation or conversation, something like that. And I'm trying to move back in and out slowly.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's based on Power of the Apocalypse, or Powered by the Apocalypse, rather.
Is it?
It is.
Yeah. I think so.
Because I've been trying to find resources to explain a little more in depth. Yeah, I ain't no strong raider, so getting some type of video or something like that will really help me out.
Well, okay, you're not a strong reader, right? A lot of people are like, they want videos, they want tutorials, they want live things. Well, I mean, there is one thing you do know. You do know video games, and you do know,
Sure.
you know, like, oh, it helps if you shush your camera. If you put your finger up to your mouth, and then hold it up to your camera, and then bring it back, that'll snap it. I lied, apparently. Your webcam was like, nah.
Hey,
there you go.
There we go.
Hey, just tell that camera to shush. Shush your mouth, camera. But like, the thing about, you've played video games, you've watched fantasy movies, you've been a D&D player for a long time. Okay. You know what is fun and you know what is entertaining. Bro, don't stress it out. Right? Start with a holiday. Start with the food stores. What do people do in town? Like, you want your characters to be invested in the world? There's nothing wrong with them spending a couple months in the middle of town speaking with the NPCs and helping them with their daily chores. Like, I think I call it the Master Chief complex, but Master Chief is a hero that people cannot relate to. You know, like, I need a weapon. I'm going to kill everything. And it's like, well, you're stuck here with us normies. What are you going to do? I'm going to stand over here in my suit and never take my helmet off and get to know anybody. Right? Like, that's really lame. But if you can get them invested in the world, like, okay, traditionally we go out and we gather gifts, but we don't buy the gifts. We hand make them. This is a craftsman holiday. You are encouraged to join. Like the Vikings, it is seen as an offensive thing if you don't get gifts for people. Right. Okay, well, what the hell do we get them? So now the players are like, we're going to go meet with these people and stuff. And then if they make a really good impression on the town, at the end of it, be like, you know, the town let you stay there for free. You know, the tavern opened up its larder and you were able to stay in its larder. Have the town scratch their back. Have them help out, you know?
Right. Yeah, that
rewards do not have to be treasure.
Right.
It doesn't.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's a big thing for me in D&D. D&D has always had this problem, and I don't know if Jeremy feels the same way, but the economy in D&D is stupid. It is stupid.
It's best not to think about it too much.
Right. Like a gold piece, according to the DMs, like D&D did a thing in 4th edition where they were evaluating how much a gold piece would be. It's $5. Okay. So of course, when you're buying a sword and it's 180 gold, you're like, you know, I could buy that easy. I can't buy that plate mail. It's 1,500, you know? Okay. So they go out and save money. Now they have plate mail. Now they have all their things and they have all this money and they don't know what to do with. What's D&D's answer? Some of the most common magic items around are 75,000 gold. What? Like, that's such a dumb economy system. Like, there's other things to do treasure wise that don't involve.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite things to do is when we read, like, for example, did you watch Game of Thrones, Viva?
Yes.
Okay, what was the name of Arya's sword?
I have no idea.
Needle. You know,
Needle,
it had
yeah.
a name. Had a name. It had a personality. You know, what was the name of Eddard Stark's? You know, Eddard Stark's sword. They all have names. Look at Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings, Sting. Look at these weapons that are legendary, right?
Mhm.
I encourage any DM to give them a shitty basic longsword that has a long history, and then as they level the
Mhm.
longsword up.
Yeah.
Let them have their Sting and let that legendary
Mm-hmm.
weapon like totally feed into it, because
Right.
it's not that it's a shitty longsword and that's why you sucked with it. It's that this item is actually a good longsword, but you
Mhm.
haven't been practiced with it enough. So reflect that
Right.
practice in that legendary gear.
Mhm.
Make it more interesting. You don't have to rely on money.
Yeah.
Just rely on other rewards.
Or even beyond that, you know, like one of the long running campaigns that I have on my channel is Arthurian themed. And through the course of that game, now we've been playing it for a really long time, but through the course of that game, one of the characters has become a baron. One of them has been knighted. He started the game as a squire, and now he has his own knighthood. And they're gathering followers and lands kind of as they're progressing through
Oh, I
the
love
story.
that.
And it's not about how much gold they have necessarily, or how many, you know, how many +1 weapons that they have found throughout the course of the
Mhm.
campaign. It's, you know, their characters are progressing in society, as, you know, they're gaining these in-character rewards.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that a lot. Especially when you mention, like, you know, you're going around, you're got to buy land, you got to support the men that you're recruiting. I mean, they all have to be equipped with basic needs and you know, armor, swords, stuff like that. I like that aspect of D&D. I think I guess for some players it like bogs down because it turns into like, all right, well, now I got to open up my spreadsheet on how many hirelings I have,
But it doesn't
and
have to.
sure, absolutely.
In
Yeah,
this game, we don't handle a lot of the minutia.
Mhm.
It's like,
Gotcha.
you know, there's enough money that you're finding throughout the course of your adventuring,
Right. You can
and the
just
people that are
fund.
there are
Mhm.
self-sufficient enough because you've
Mhm.
chosen these people very carefully, that it's kind of taking care of itself in the background. Now, if that player wanted to spend more attention on the
Mhm.
minutia of it, then
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fine. But
Right.
if they're okay with just kind of letting it go in the background, like, it
Mhm.
functions perfectly fine on its own, just narratively.
For sure. I love it. That, yeah, I like all of that. I love all of this.
Yeah, and
This is
honestly,
great.
there is a D&D book that's actually quite useful for that, and that's the Acquisitions Incorporated Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master Guide. It actually has a framework on owning your own business and how to make it fun.
Well,
Like, it's actually
that's neat.
really good. It's really good, but
Mhm.
I will say, like, if your party's not enjoying something, pull out. You know,
Oh,
pull out.
absolutely.
If they're not enjoying something,
Mhm.
pull out. If they're enjoying it, great. Embrace it.
Right.
If you've got a group of poop jokes, you can still have a dark campaign with very incredible story and still have poop jokes. Look at Critical Role and Scanlan. He literally scries his turds in jars and hides them throughout buildings and stuff. And it's a dirty, childish joke, but it still does the same thing. It allows them to get their poo humor out of the way, but also there's a compelling dark storyline to it. So embrace the oddities. If you have somebody who is like, I'll keep track of the finances and I'll keep track of the equipment, and they make their little, they hand draw their chart on their character sheet, embrace that and give them the business.
Right. Yeah. That's it. You're
Like,
CEO
let that
now.
person, right, let that person do it. And I always say, you know, there should be roles in a party, and I'm a big fan of that. There should be a leader. It reminds me of the animated series Doraleous and Associates. That's a funny series, but Doraleous is leader, but nobody respects him. Give somebody the treasurer role, give somebody the quartermaster role, you know, split those roles up. If you actually split roles up and people have a purpose, that also helps with downtime.
and it gives them something to kind of take ownership of as well in kind of the inner workings of the party. Oh, hi, Cat.
Yeah,
100%.
In my home group.
Oh shit, sure, Cat. He gets inspiration.
Yeah. I don't know if she'll come up on
in one of my home groups, the one that plays here at my house. We have a long-standing tradition where one of the players at the table keeps track of the damage that's on all of the monsters that we're fighting.
Oh, that's
so
helpful.
that the DM doesn't have to keep track of where they are in their hit points. And they'll just check in, every time somebody does some damage, or, especially if it's a significant amount of damage, where's the monster at? Okay. You can notice that, the monster's wounded. It's, it's starting to wear down. It's getting close, but it's not there yet. And it takes one of the plates that the GM has to have spinning all the time and takes it away from them. And it also increases the investment of the other player, because now they're having to pay attention to what's going on every single turn, not just their own.
I love that.
Yeah, I agree. I even am 100% in the fact of, like, if you're going to dominate a character, bro, turn them loose on the party. Explain what dominate means and just turn them loose. This is your chance to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Yeah, for sure.
Give them the freedom. And the one thing, and I will say, Death of the Deities has been going on. We're on 80. We just did the 82nd episode. Has it been a smooth ride? No. And I'm going to tell you why. I have never had a campaign last this long. And as we're nearing the end, I'm looking at the end with panic, right? I want to sunset this. I want to give the campaign the death it deserves. But at the same time, it's put me on edge a little bit. And the first thing to admit when you're a DM is, look, guys, if I seem on edge, it's because this has been so amazing. And I'm kind of getting emotional to see it go. Right? Like, I'm going to be bawling at the last episode. But always clue your players into what you're thinking. The DM does not have to be M. Night Shyamalan. Okay, it's not your job to throw twists at them and leave them unexpected. Say, this is where I want to go with the campaign. What do you guys think? I want your feedback. I always tell people that my entire campaign is written by the players, because due in large part it is.
Yeah.
Of course, we have our snarky little Discord conversations where it's like, and I'm not even going to bring it up because that's a podcast in itself, but we were just talking about the fact that you can't cast spells through a closed window because it can't cast through glass. That's raw. And we all laughed about how stupid that was. And then came up, we tried to justify the rules, but in the end, we couldn't justify the rules. It's a stupid ass rule. That is the dumbest thing. But we still have fun with it. We criticize, but also congratulate. That's the thing. Criticize and congratulate. Like, congratulate things that are good about a system, criticize the things that aren't, and then understand what the system's trying to do. What is the motive of this mechanic? Oh, okay, now I understand it. This is how I'm going to employ it. And if you incorporate the players into that planning process, that writing process, all of a sudden, bro, it all just falls into place. Now, Jeremy is a humble man. I'm starting to learn that more and more. The one thing that bugs me about Jeremy's humbleness is what he didn't tell you about his homebrew campaign is this man's a craftsman. And he makes these pieces that are breathtaking. Okay, it wasn't as simple as, oh, this is an Orient themed campaign. It's very influenced by Legend of the Five Rings and things like that. There's a boat, and you guys have a boat. No, he painstakingly handcrafted an amazing looking boat that people would 100% spend $200 on if they could buy it as a piece. And it's like that kind of love. Where his players, in all the pictures on his Facebook, his players are sitting there with phones. It's kind of like whenever you go out with your friends and they take pictures of their meal to put it on Instagram. And I'm like, why are you taking pictures of your food, bro? But like, this was worth it. That just seeing that, it was like, oh, this is amazing. Little things like that you can do as a DM that only you can do. And it 100%, embraces it. But it's not exclusive to the DM. If you have somebody who's really good at art at your table, like Dimension 119 has Ray, have them draw tokens, celebrate their art, have them make set pieces. I need a boat and this is what I need. Don't tell them why. Don't tell them what you're planning on doing with it. Or be honest and tell them exactly what you plan to do with it. Because one of the biggest rules in role playing is no meta, right? Let me ask you genuinely, Viva, is no meta a problem at your table? Do you have a problem with somebody using meta knowledge all the time?
I've had maybe one instance where I felt like this is a too meta for me, but almost never. Because even if even if I've told players like, hey, this is that kind of the direction that we're going, or give them a heads up, like, hey, this is a really deadly encounter. I'm not saying this because I want you to be extra cautious now. Still play your character as normal, but just be advised that someone might drop, someone might, especially early on where I was deathly afraid of dropping a character, never mind killing them. You know, yeah, it only takes a couple to get past that one. Um, but yeah, I almost never have an issue with characters being using outside knowledge or knowledge that I've given to them to influence the way that they play.
How about you, Jeremy? Do you have a problem with meta in your campaigns?
I think it really depends on the intention. Like if they're doing it to circumvent a challenge that is intended for the party, then I have to call them on the bullshit.
Yep.
Because it's like, look, man, I spent 2 or 3 hours putting this challenge together for you, and the only reason that you're going to try to overcome it is because as a player, not your character, but as a player, the answer to this riddle.
Right.
Like, don't be a dick. Like the golden rule. Like, as a player, there's a part of the contract, the social contract, that I think a lot of players forget about, is that your responsibility is to drive the fun and the engagement at the table just as much as the GM. So you should be constantly looking for ways that you can engage with what the GM has already put effort into. Like, yeah, you might know that it's a trap, but nobody's going to think that you're a brilliant person because you figured that out. Like, lean into it. Like, if your character doesn't have any reason to suspect that there's a trap there, then walk into the fucking trap. Quit being a baby.
That's where taking 2 L's, and I always tell this to people, taking 2 L's makes a W.
Yeah.
Exactly. And but the thing is, to be honest though, how many percentage of problem players do you really, in all the games you've run, how many times is that an issue? Very small, right? Very small. Same with me. Very small, very low. Usually it's with power gamers, but I weed those guys out. Usually it's with new players, but I'm patient and understanding.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't really have a problem with it. Now, we've all three agreed that it is a problem once in a while, but very, very rarely does it happen. Well, then include them in on the plans. Because especially when you're playing digitally, we're not just doing this to play D&D. We're doing this to write an amazing story for the viewers, for our audience. So include them in the planning process. Let them know that there's going to be a giant, and your intention with the giant is that when he gets too wounded, he's going to run away, and he's going to do it about 3 or 4 times. When he gets wounded and he runs away, the players immediately, the characters are like, "Are you okay? What was that about?"
Right.
Into it because they don't have that mentality of, "I have to go and kill this." And I always ask people, would you cheat in a video game? If you had cheat codes to Dark Souls, because there are cheat codes to every video game. It's a developer, right? Are you going to use cheat codes on Dark Souls? Are you going to use an aimbot on Call of Duty? Some people do, but it's a very small amount of streamers that do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Have the faith that your players won't cheat. And if they do, get them out.
Yep.
And
that's when it becomes a problem. Yeah.
Right. Tell them in the very beginning, I'm going to give you the chains to help me write the story. I'm going to give you insights to what I'm planning as a DM.
Right.
I do that all the time. And I even have, after every time we stream Death of the Deities, an open table. Questions, comments, concerns, the direction you want the game to go in. We have an open table.
I love that.
I'm very transparent. Because where I shock my players is the consequences of their actions. That's where I shock my players.
I definitely, I love the idea that you mentioned multiple times. And I haven't DM'd in a while, but when I did consistently, I tried to keep that mentality of mainly this is a cooperative game. Everyone is writing the story together. There is one situation that is probably hands down one of my favorite situations I've ever ran into while DMing a game. Is the party, there's 3 of them. They had to get a bottle of rum off of an island, but the customs guard kept catching them. So they're like, I don't know how to get this rum off the island because he's got to give it to a pirate so they can get a treasure map or something, right? So they go around, they find a smuggler. right? And the smuggler is like, yeah, I got a boat. I can take it to the mainland. Perfect. So they get in there and they get into an argument or something with the smuggler. He's a hefty guy, seaman. He's been in quite a few brawls.
Yeah, he's a salty dog.
He's there we go, salty
Yeah.
dog, right? And we're getting into it, and my characters, they're like, hold on, we need to have a huddle. And they left the room. And I'm like, what the fuck you mean you have to have a huddle? What's going on? Right? Because like,
can I get a sidebar? Can I get a sidebar?
Yeah.
Let's get a sidebar. We'll be right back. Sidebar.
Yeah. So I'm sitting here at the table, just like looking at my battle map, like, what the hell are they planning? So I start scheming. I'm like, all right, hold on. And like, it got to the point in an argument where it's like, all right, now this is coming to blows. We all know it. And they done, what's it? So they come back and they're like, all right, we're ready. And I'm like, what do you mean we're ready? And goes, this is going to happen. So they start arguing with them again. And one of their characters, they just all took so they took the gnome, used him as a battering ram, and everyone just pushed this hefty dwarf straight off the boat. And he was wearing like chain armor or something like that, so he couldn't really swim too well. And
oh
then
my
like,
god, that is some Hook bullshit if I've ever seen it. Like, isn't that in Hook where they use a kid as a battering ram? That's amazing.
So they knock this dwarf off, and then one of them takes a paddle and starts beating him over the head, and the other one's casting lightning bolts in the water. I'm like, did I just get mugged?
Yeah,
I just got jacked for my fucking boat.
As a DM, here's my advice. Okay, one of the things my players always say that they love about my campaigns is that I just roll with it. That's because
oh yeah, I loved it.
2 L's become a W, right? Like that goes for DMs too. Sometimes the DM has to take, as long as it doesn't derail the story.
Oh yeah,
they will respect the story. They know the story is being told, but if you let them get away with some shisty shit, by all means.
Like they had,
but also like
I loved it.
The great thing about like leaving your story malleable is that there's almost always a way to get where you need things or want things to go from just about anywhere. If you can just leave yourself open to pivot enough, even if this one character was supposed to be kind of a challenge and it didn't turn out that way.
Oh yeah,
you can just use the way that it did go to eventually draw a line back to kind of where you need things to be. If you just kind of think about it and mull it over enough, you can usually make most things work as even a fail forward kind of situation. And again, like these games ultimately are all about conflict and overcoming conflict.
Yes.
That's what it's about. That's why we tell stories that have such tragic outcomes and crazy stakes, is because it's all about overcoming conflict. So when there is a failure, that's a conflict that then gets to be resolved. So it makes your story more entertaining than if they're just waltzing through everything without any concern whatsoever. That's boring.
Right.
That is boring.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
There's no risk. And it also makes the victory hollow. Like one of the things that I did in one campaign is we had the rogue wanted to do a sneak attack, a flying sneak attack. Okay, well, I'm sorry, you don't fly. I'm confused. So what they did was they went into this warehouse before they were going to talk to this crime boss. They showed up 4 hours early and they set up a pulley system. And the idea was that they were the barbarian was going to spear chuck the rogue, and the rogue was going to come out of nowhere and get a sneak attack. Right. Well, let's play into that. So I said, okay, roll your athletics check, Mr. Barbarian. He rolled a nat 20. And they're like, oh yeah, we totally got that guy. And I'm like, no. See, as a DM, I can still turn this win into kind of a loss, but still play into the crazy. What they did was a crazy ass plan.
Oh, it's 100% Looney Tunes.
Right? So he chucked this rogue, got a nat 20 on his athletics check, and the rogue goes and flies right past the dude. And the rogue's like, wait, he got a nat 20. What are you talking about? I'm like,
oh yeah,
patient. Have faith with me. So the rogue misses because he wasn't ready for it. He's flying through the air so fast, and then hits the wall, right? And he crashes into some boards, and then the rogue is just dangling in front of the big bad. And the players are immediately salty. They're like, what the? I'm being punished for a great roll. But then I immediately role played it like the Rube Goldberg machine. right? They crashed into the planks. The planks fell over. It tipped over a bucket. And the entire time, the rogue's sitting there suspended in front of the big bad, but he sees this big, heavy cannonball rolling on the rafters and then landing. And the boss is having this narrative like, you thought you could defeat me by hanging on a rope? Look at you. And he's grabbing the rope. I could just crush your you're mine. And then they're just... And then the cannonball goes thunk off of a beam, crashes right into the boss's head. His eyes go cross-eyed and he falls over. I still let the plan work, but that nat 20, the guy was like, I raged, nat 20. I'm like, dude, I've never seen anybody reach light speed before in a D&D campaign, but that rogue was going damn near light speed. Like, let him succeed, but also throw him for a loop narratively. Like, maybe they succeed, but not in the way they wanted to. The rogue was a goofball character anyway, so I wanted his victory to be kind of a goofball victory.
No, that is so perfect. Oh my goodness. I'm thinking we'll do one last little thing, and then we'll probably wrap it up from there if that works out, guys. One question that I wanted to ask you guys, because I mean, you've just been a wealth of knowledge as far as running games, being a player, and just D&D in general. Really appreciate you guys being here. The one question I would like to kind of pick your brains about is session prep. Do you prep at all? What kind of session prep do you do? How detailed and intense or lack thereof? Or does it, determined by obviously campaign, whatever it is? But how do you guys work that? Want to work with? We'll ask Jeremy first.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it kind of depends. Sometimes I'll have a really strong idea of what I want to do in any given situation. It might be based on something that happened, in the last session or any one of the previous sessions. Honestly, if a story arc is coming to fruition or something like that, then I know it needs to be touched on in a scene. Then I'll spend time developing that to whatever degree I feel like it needs it. Preparing whatever NPCs, a location, items that might need it, monster stats if I have to do any of that kind of stuff, because I very rarely use any of the monsters the way that they're written out of the book. It's almost always tailored, at least to some degree, to better fit what I need it to do in the story. I try to get a lot of that kind of stuff prepared. I use, again, a lot of artwork for inspiration for that, as well as I kind of go shopping in the various background information that I get from my players, if they're in a campaign of mine. And I kind of go through and take pieces of what they've given me and look for ways to incorporate that into what I have planned, to kind of, again, build investment, to guarantee that they're going to take a bite of the hook, that kind of thing. And then I type it all up, usually to a page of bulleted entries, where I have my introduction paragraph written. That's the thing that I'm going to read to let everybody know, like Jarl was saying earlier with the particular keyword. I just use this paragraph as a way of launching from the stream production side of things to the ice breaking side into we're playing the game now. It kind of helps me to set the stage and the tone, and also I use it almost like the way that a previously on thing for a television series would be written. It's here's the kind of tone or the notes that we're probably going to be touching on in this session. These are the things that I'm kind of telling the players that we might kind of gravitate towards. Like I said, then I keep it up I try to keep it to a single page, unless I have to have lists of something like names for NPCs or obscure rules about mounted combat or something like that printed out on the side.
Gotcha.
And then I usually just run my sessions based on just that one piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
I don't prep. I just build encounters. And I know that sounds crazy. The one thing I will say, to Jeremy's point, he never keeps the monster stats the way they are. That is one thing I miss about 4th edition. It wasn't just a kobold. You had a spear kobold, you had a dragon shield kobold, you had a sword fighting kobold, you had a winged kobold, you had the minion kobolds. It was so much easier with 4th edition to go, this isn't just a lizard man, this is a this is a kobold shaman. It's got color spray. You know, you were able to do stuff like that,
That's
which
a good point.
that I don't do enough, and I really should. But I remember Brennan Mulligan from Dimension 20 saying something once, that when 3.5 was going strong, he went out and bought this really expensive module, and it was great. And the module starts off at a wedding, and you're supposed to be watching this wedding between these dwarves, and you know, the bride looks really nervous, almost seems absent from it. And then, you know, what's going to happen is the big bad shows up and then kidnaps the wife. That's the start of the campaign. Well, the players saw this wedding and they misinterpreted her anxiety of the wedding as in she didn't want to marry this guy. So they kidnapped the bride, and it totally changed the way the campaign from the get-go worked. And he said that $50 campaign he spent money into was literally a waste, because they just totally took. So I have had the same things happen where I have created maps upon maps upon maps, and I'm a Photoshop perfectionist. I've spent hours creating these things. You know, I'm part of several Patreons, including 2 Minute Tabletop, where I've got all of these assets to these places, and I'm like, no, I'm doing it wrong. What I need to do is the dungeons need to be blank, and then just go one by one. I decide what's in
tile
the room.
by tile.
Tile by tile. They enter a room. There you go. And then I open up my tokens pack, and my furniture I put in the map layer, and and just go. But I can't plan anything, not because my party's crazy, but because I have that much faith in the way they write the story. I literally do not ever plan for my campaigns. I plan the encounters out. But what I do is I do milestone XP. So I do have milestones that I want the players to get to. But at the same time, it's like, bro, I am not going to waste my week. I'm a dad who works full time and streams part time. I need to spend time with my family as well. And I do not have the time to plan for the campaign for a week. Just had to have the players take a 90-degree angle on that. Right. Me as a DM, my rule of thumb is it's like a sandbox game, right? Like Skyrim. It's not my job to write the story. It's not my job to create the challenges. My job is to create the world. And the world has challenges, and the world has society, and the world has its own story. But really what the players do with it is entirely up to them. You know, I remember one time they invented a submersible. Okay, great. In one of my campaigns, these dwarves and gnomes came up with a submersible, and they were going to use it to sneak into an enemy base. And I'm like, all right, let's do that. Now I have an underwater adventure that I can incorporate, where we have a kraken and other tropes that rope them up, that now I have to do on the fly. And I've just thought, you know what? I have no problem telling my chat live, telling my players live, well, I didn't expect this. Give me a moment. You know, that is one of the things about D&D Beyond. Right. Just give me a second. Hang on. And just do it one at a time, one room at a time. It may feel like it takes a long time, but breadcrumbing that progress. And then once that session is over, now I go home and write the rest of the dungeon. Because I already committed to it, or I write the rest of the adventure. And then people are like, how do you plan improvising like that? Well, let's say we have a cave where there's an entrance on one side and a waterfall with a hidden entrance, right? What's the story? Well, I don't want to know about the bandits that live there. Clearly, this cave wasn't just used by the bandits. I have no idea what threats will be in there, because, again, my players will go whatever direction they want. So I could fill the cave with goblins, with bandits, with kobolds, with bears, whatever. Instead, what I'll do is I'll think, what was this used for in the past? Well, thousands of years ago, before the cities were built, they used to build ships in this cave, and then they'd release the longboats down the river. So maybe at the bottom of the bay, there's a sunken longboat. Maybe there's evidence of ancient working tools. However, what goes in that cave is entirely up to the party's direction. And I just can't. That's why I can't do one-shots. One-shots, I think, require a little finer tuning, because you have to get to a certain point by the end of that 4 hours for the one shot to be memorable. And maybe that's just my perspective on it. Jeremy does a lot of tremendously amazing one shots and trilogies.
Fantastic.
I just can't do it. I can't. My brain doesn't operate that way.
Yeah, it's different. It's a different kind of storytelling. It's a lot more railroady. You're limited on time. Time is definitely your biggest resource. So you have to get really, really comfortable with understanding when a scene has kind of played itself out and when it's time to jump in there and move it to the next thing. But in campaigns, I'm the exact opposite. You know, there's a campaign on my channel that two of the characters got into an in-character debate with one another that went on for 90 minutes. And I just let it run. I took my hands off the steering wheel, Tyler Durden style, and just sat back in my chair and just let it happen. And it was fantastic. Like the role playing that they gave in that moment was tremendous. And I'm just sitting there with my fake popcorn, just enjoying it as an audience member. So I think that there's a lot to be said with letting the unplanned moments play out. But for me personally, for my campaigns at least, I like to have an idea of kind of where I want the story going from the very beginning. And I try very hard to seed little hints here and there, so that by the time that we get to the end, my hope is that somebody can look back at it, maybe even rewatch it and go, oh, holy shit, okay, now this little thing that seemed innocuous now has all of this context that's attached to it. As a storyteller, that's what I find very, very rewarding. But what I have to be careful of is that I don't keep control over all of the aspects of the story. And it's a precarious kind of creating for a story, because I have to make pieces that don't always have a home, and I just have to kind of like leave them on the shelf, or leave them in the dark, and they may never even see the light of day. But if there becomes a moment where it's like, wait a second, this one element of what that person just said, or that decision that they just made, I could tie that to this thing that I didn't get to use earlier. So I'll just change it a little bit, the things about it that don't really matter, the curtain dressings or whatever. And now it works for this. So then I'm going to do that next session.
Yeah, that makes total sense too. Like in the
Mhm.
example of the boat in your campaign that you built, like on a digital game, you may have this idea for this boat and you may make it a certain way, but then the party takes it in a completely wrong direction. And now you're like, I'm going to shelve this boat. I have no need for it. They told the person they're not interested in a boat. But then 20 episodes later, you're like, oh, they get kidnapped by pirates. Now you could pull off that boat, change the way it looks, change the crew that's aboard it, but still use those maps, still use that pre-planned
Absolutely.
kind of environment. And that's basically what it's all about. I think, as my last note before we wrap up tonight, my tool that I use, and it drives a lot of DMs crazy, is you always hear me say, the camera pans in and it's a wide shot. And I refer to the camera very much like it's a filming show. And people are like, oh, I love it because you make it so cinematic. No, I don't. I say the camera so that when I ask the characters, what does this look like? They can take control of the camera. The camera pans up to but my players, my players think I'm making this cinematic Lord of the Rings movie, but no. With my improv campaign style and the way that I operate things, it's more like a reality TV show. And my job as the producers is to watch the party interact with one another and then throw drama into the mix to make that reality show more spicy. Like it's like the Big Brother of D&D. But using a tool like a camera, it gives your players the realization that they are also the directors, right? So they'll take control of the camera, and if you trust them with the camera, then they'll respect it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of my favorite tools is something that I picked up from Will Wheaton whenever he ran a beautiful campaign called Titan Grave.
That must have been an easy campaign if all the monsters were rolling ones. No,
but he did this thing where he literally would present a situation and then he would ask for direct narrative input from the characters.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of it being you walk into a store and you see this particular thing on the shelf, and then like leaving it to them, he would say you walk into a shelf and you see an item on the shelf that you really, really want. Tell me what that is.
I love that tool.
You have kept control of what you need to have happen in this situation. You need the character to want this thing.
Right.
But you've given freedom to design and fill in the narrative blanks where it's not going to damage what you need to have happen, but will give them a chance to shine and give insight into who their characters are as people.
Yeah, 100%. I do that a lot as well. Like I'll sit there in my town and I'll say, you see a couple peasants arguing and they're arguing passionately, but what is it that they're arguing about and who are they that got your attention? And all of a sudden, Banvar's telling me that it's these two poor people fighting over food. We've now established that there's a lack of food in town. Great. This is amazing. But you can railroad them to an item or to a person or to a certain behavior or a certain event. You guys hear an explosion. When you look over, what is it? But you're allowing the players to write it, and they have that little bit of a DM cap that they're like, now I don't want to derail it.
Yeah. It focuses in more that it's our story.
Right. Well, and also like by giving a parameter, it breeds more easier creativity. Like creativity loves boundaries. Like if you hand someone a prompt, essentially, it doesn't matter what this is, but this one thing has to be true. Tell me what that is. Immediately, they're going to draw a line between the thing that has to be true and their character's motivations or history or the way they're personally feeling, and they're going to make an immediate connection between those things and start drawing upon that for creativity. And it fills in the blank so much faster than sitting there going, oh man, I hadn't thought about it. I don't know, what does an old person in this town look like? I have no idea. And if you have some place to start, it happens so much faster.
Right. And you know what the other thing is with that, when you have players tell you about the NPCs, who they are, what they look like, how they behave, there's one thing. Viva, I'm going to put you on the spot. Give me an old man now.
An old man?
Yeah, now. Just talk as an old man.
Oh. Hello.
I love that.
Hello.
That's it, right? Don't worry about getting... You sound like James Randall from GTA RP. I love it. Do not hesitate.
That was the first old man in my head.
I'm James Randall, and I'm 82 years old. But, definitely just go with it. Don't be afraid that your impressions are going to suck. Otherwise, your players are going to be afraid that their impressions... If they tell you that there's a Scottish farmer, it doesn't matter that Scotland's not a place in your world. Just be like, "Right, welcome." I don't care if it ends up sounding like, "My lucky charms are magically delicious." The fact that you're trying, the fact that you're putting that seasoning on there makes it more believable for them, makes it more believable for the party. And also laugh at yourself, for crying out loud.
Oh, yeah.
Laugh at yourself when you say something wrong, or, when you describe a scene wrong.
True.
Laugh at yourself, laugh at the players, have some good, hilarious, side chat. I love the fact that Skya just totally blew off that guy, left him on red. That's funny. It's a modern joke, but we all know it. We all understand it. It's good. But at the same time, it's like, bro, if they tell you that you have the perfect example, I had a nerd who was using a quill that was copying books like a scribe, like a scriptorium, right? But this quill makes the books more believable. Whoever reads it feels like they're actually in the world. That was a throwaway. That was a throwaway character, but I even named him Ponzo, which was an alteration of the term Ponzi. Right. And then they're like, we need to find out who did this. And it turns out it's this kid who's 16 years old. And I'm like, he's super nerdy. They're like, how nerdy? Baggy clothes, big shoes, glasses, nerdy. And I was like, yeah, let's go with that. So they want a super stereotypical nerd. So when they stepped up, he's like, hi, I'm Ponzo. And it was Ponzi for Ponzi scheme. It was supposed to be just a shyster, but the characters loved it so much that they started lacquering this bull crap, and they ended up realizing, they're like, wow, that guy's kind of an asshole. They said that out of character. I didn't see him as that. I saw it as this kid who's trying to make money. And I'm like, you know what? Let's role play him as kind of an asshole. So he's like, I immediately thought of the gatekeeping nerd. And then I was like, well, if I'm thinking gatekeeping nerd, let's make him a DM. Like the whole reason why he writes these stories of people getting captured in, he's a game master for a game called Animals and Adventures, which is a D&D game within my D&D game where they are playing as Redwall style animals, right? And he's just the most socially obtuse person ever. Like there'd be several points in the diplomacy where they're like, okay, we need to get this item from the guy, but let's just make sure we're nice to him. He's kind of a gruff guy, but they didn't tell Ponzo that the dude is hideous. So they took Ponzo with them. And the first thing they opened the door and Ponzo's like, oh my God, you look like your face was rubbed against a cheese grater. Oh, Jesus. I thought I had bad luck with women. Holy God. Like he says the things that the party doesn't want to say. And they're just like, Ponzo, you're an idiot. Get out of here. And I realized I accidentally made medieval Steve Urkel, but it ended up being one of the greatest NPCs around.
Very famous NPC of that one. That Animals and Adventures series you did was wonderful.
Oh man, yeah. So we actually had some players call out. We'd canceled the game twice because it was really bad illnesses going around, and we wanted to play D&D, but I didn't feel comfortable just jumping back into the campaign and continuing the story. So I had them play a game. They played NPCs in the town who played characters in this Animals and Adventures game, and it was just ludicrous. And I had so much fun with it. And then it became the running joke that this guy is just this amazing game master. And he went upstairs because he didn't have paper. How many times have you not had paper or pens when you ran an impromptu D&D game, right? It happened all the time.
Yep.
So he went upstairs into one of the main character's bedroom and stole her political documents that were contracts for trade and wrote the maps on the back of them. Totally ruining it all.
That's hilarious.
But yeah,
that's so much good stuff.
Just if it's a joke, make a joke. Embrace the jokes. I always think of like Legolas and Gimli, and I know people are like, how Lord of the Rings movies had them so funny, and Merry and Pippin were warriors. They weren't these stupid, clumsy people in the books. You're right, they weren't. But you know what? It added that humor that those movies needed.
If you don't give people a place for humor to be interjected, they will find a place to do so on their own, and it's not going to be the right place,
and they'll force it in.
Exactly. You
right,
cannot
and you as DM can't say read the room, right? Exactly. You can't say read the room, and it's like, read the room, you've given us no chance to be funny. Like
Yep, exactly. Well, but again, also even in a story that has a lot of intensity to it, that ratchets up that tension, you need to have those moments of break, those moments of fall, when you touch on levity and comedy, because that resets the palate. Exactly. Yeah. Because if you do that at some point, people just get numb. They no longer feel the ratcheting of the tension. It no longer has an effect. But if you reset with a moment of levity and then come back from that, you can start cranking that tension all the way up again. And when you reach the top, it's going to be even higher because they didn't fall all the way back down to baseline 0. It was just enough to be reminded that it's not all bad, that there is some good worth fighting for, to kind of go back to Lord of the Rings. But having those little moments are like cool, a little bit of a breather. And now we can put our heads down again.
I love it.
100% agree.
Well, this has been an absolute treat. I really appreciate you guys coming in and just spending a few hours just talking about, stuff that we'd be talking about anyway, probably.
It was so funny because I remember when we were talking about this, you're like, so I'm thinking 1 to 2 hours, and I'm like, you're cute. You get a bunch of people that haven't talked together about D&D in a room. It's gonna.
I'm glad I can bridge the gap here.
This was a blast. This was an absolute blast.
That
I feel truly blessed.
It means a lot, man. It's been great.
And now we can, when Dimension 119 asks how it went, we'll just tell them,
Yeah, you didn't miss much.
No. We only did it for like 30 minutes, He looks at the VOD. God dang.
There's no chemistry. It's very flat.
Right.
No chemistry. Yeah.
I
Jeremy and
actually,
I hate each other.
yeah, I actually
Viva's still a
hate these
trash
guys.
D&D player.
I'm so bad at D&D, but that's a whole other podcast.
No, you're
in
not. No, you're not. You know what I love about it is that you have no problem laughing when you make a mistake, and then everybody laughs with you. I will say, when I watch Dimension 119, they're not laughing at you; they're laughing with you, and that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
But to close out, let's just, I guess, reintroduce, outro yourselves. Let people know how they can find you, what you got going on, if there's anything exciting in the works that you guys are working on. Tell the people what's going on. We'll go top to bottom. Jarl, what you got going on?
Well, something coming up down the pipes is, as you guys may know, I'm a beta tester for Modifius's upcoming products, and they recently bought a 5th edition based game that I love called Stargate SG-1, and now they're hyping the heck out of it. So I'm going to be running a Stargate game, but I'm trying to look for players that I don't normally play with, just to mix it up. But I'm going to go ahead and post my link. You guys can find me there. Feel free to hit that follow button. Definitely hit Viva's follow button. If you're from my community and you haven't followed Viva yet, I'm ashamed. But definitely going to be pulling that out. Wild West Dynasty just came out today. And I'm going to be playing that, of course. And just tune in, because we're going to be doing a Stargate campaign, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And it's going to be on I think it's going to be on Tuesdays. I'm not quite sure. I have to talk with the missus because I enjoy my marriage. But you know, like, I'm going to have people who are passionate about the series, not necessarily passionate about role-playing games, because I think that's important.
Sure, so. Absolutely. Yeah, do the whole setting justice. So awesome.
Right.
Erasmus, what's the happenings, man? Where can people find you?
Again, I have a YouTube channel called the Erasmas Expeditions. You can head over there if you like watching sessions of live plays or like discussions like this. There's plenty of content on the channel. I think there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 320 something videos uploaded now. I have a couple of completed campaigns over there. I have a few that are currently running. One of them is going on 5 years now. I really enjoy RPGs and everything that's kind of related to them, from running games to crafting them. I'm a game designer. I have a game system that I designed myself that is on sale on my drive-through store. There's 4 versions of that. I am currently working on 2 different game systems. One I am designing with another team of people, and it is called Biddy Battles. It is kind of like a dice game that is reminiscent of Super Smash Brothers in a lot of regards. The second version of that should be coming out hopefully very soon. And then the other game system that I'm designing is called Gore. It is heavily based on the Doom franchise. I'm working on that on my own. I've done a little bit of playtesting with it on the channel, but hopefully sometime this year I'll be able to put that out in some form or fashion. On the channel, I have next Friday, the next one shot that's going to happen is going to be Tom Clancy's Carmen Sandiego. I am playtesting a game system that a friend of mine is designing that is all kind of centered around spies, and that's what I'm going to do with it. So hopefully it comes together. I'm really excited about it. But yeah, man, just a huge fan of both of what you do, and I was really excited to be invited on to the channel to kind of sit down and talk with both of you. And again, like, I could talk about this shit all day, so getting to do it with other people is always fun, especially if I haven't had the conversation with them before. It's nice to get a fresh perspective on our hobby. So thank you very much for inviting me to come along for this.
Yeah, you two are 100% always welcome on the show or anything that I'm doing. Thanks again. It's been an absolute treat. I guess I guess this is the end of it. This is where the popular streamers go and try rating someone, right? That's how that works. Before I do that, I wanted to just thank you guys again for being here, and thank everyone who came by. This was
it's a great turnout.
a wild showing that I would never have thought. We got just about everyone from Jarl's game. We got Diamond X and Scott Dog came in. I pop into Scott Dog's stream as much as I physically can. He is hilarious, and a great like he's got good camera presence. So I like being in his streams a lot. But yeah, we got a bunch of people. Yo Jorge, a buddy of mine I play Overwatch with. He popped in, so that was exciting. But we're gonna go through. All right, here we go. We're gonna raid channel.